Quality of life and self-report in children and adolescents with cognitive disability. Erica Ikeda. A thesis submitted to Auckland University of Technology. In partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Master of Health Science, MHSC. 2013. School of Sport and Recreation. She. Abstract. The purpose of this research was to initiate the development of a tool that could be used by children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders, ASDs, or mild intellectual disability, MID, to communicate perspectives of their quality of life, QOL. This research gathered direct verbal responses and opinions from parents and children and adolescents with ASDs or MID to assess the content validity of QOL instrument. Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory TM, PEDSCAL, Child Self-Report. The PEDSCAL questionnaire is designed to measure QOL in children and adolescents based on multidimensional domains of physical, emotional, social and school functioning. This research was qualitative, descriptive and consisted of Phase 1 and 2. By using sample of convenience and purposive sampling techniques, participants were recruited from a special school, a school with a special unit in Auckland region, and via two private service providers, the Center for Autism and Related Disorders and the Wilson Home Trust in each phase. Focus groups and individual interviews in Phase 1 and the interviews in Phase 2 were employed to obtain the participants' perspectives and feedback on the appropriateness of the PEDSCAL questionnaire. The questionnaire was presented in both phases, and completed by the children and adolescents in Phase 2. Thematic and content analyses were conducted in both phases to discover key themes and categories. The findings showed that the PEDSCAL questionnaire was inappropriate for children and adolescents with ASDs or MID in terms of 1. A number of missing and irrelevant questions on social domain, 2. Use of abstract concepts and words, and 3. Monotonous formatting, response scales and presentation style. Cognitive and language ability and disease-specific symptoms such as impaired social relationships strongly influenced the comprehension and appraisal of the questionnaire. The modification of the PEDSCAL questionnaire was undertaken after Phase 1, including use of concrete wording, visuals, facial expressions and one-by-one presentation style, which assisted the children's and adolescents' understanding of and engagement with the questionnaire in Phase 2. Thus, the development of the PEDSCAL questionnaire for children and adolescents with ASDs or MID may enhance the accuracy of their self-rating and obtain their unique perception of QOL. Based on this research, future research will explore further modification of the PEDSCAL questionnaire for use in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, as well as the use of different modes of administration such as qualitative interviews and electronic devices. 1. Chapter 1, Introduction. Background. In the last few decades, autism spectrum disorders, ASDs, including autistic disorder, Asperger disorder and atypical autism, have been widely recognized as an epidemic of mental health conditions, which necessitated the rapid growth in research regarding these conditions. Elsabag et al. 2012. The prevalence of ASDs has increased worldwide over time, and the latest global prevalence rate of ASDs was estimated at 1 child out of 160, Elsabag et al. 2012. In New Zealand, the prevalence rate of ASDs is 1 child per 100, an estimated number of individuals with ASDs is over 40,000, Ministry of Education, 2013. From clinical and healthcare perspectives, ASDs are a cause of high service utilization due to their early onset, lifelong persistence, high degree of related impairment, and absence of effective treatment and intervention for the main problems such as impaired social relationships and interactions. Cremines, Iser, and Blades, 2006, Simonoff et al. 2008, Barney, Burwinkle, and Lane, 2005. The core defining attributes of ASDs are impaired social interactions, impaired communication, repetitive behaviors and restricted interest. American Psychiatric Association, APA, 2000, Plumley, 2007. The ASDs are associated with impaired cognitive abilities, epilepsy and high rates and various types of child psychiatric comorbidities such as anxiety disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and oppositional defiant disorder. Elsabag et al. 2012, Farley et al. 2009, Camp Becker et al. 2011, Sheldrick, Nedger, Shipman, and Perrin, 2011, Simonoff et al. 2008. However, differentiation between ASDs and intellectual disability, ID, is still blurred because of the attribute of diagnostic overlap between psychiatric symptoms and Intellectual impairment, Simonoff et al. 2008. In New Zealand, for instance, around 2% of children and adolescents were diagnosed with ID, Ministry of Health. 2005-2011, and approximately 28% of children and adolescents with ID had treatment or care for mental health problems including ADHD, anxiety disorder, autism spectrum, and mood disorder, Ministry of Health, 2011. Furthermore, both ASDs and ID significantly impact on personal development in social, psychological, physical and material well-being in children and adolescents such as school activities, education, peer. 2. Relationships and healthcare costs, McIntyre, Kremer, Blacker, and Zimmerman, 2004. Ministry of Health, 2005-2011, Sherlock, 2004, Simonoff et al., 2008. The World Health Organization Quality of Life Group, WHO QOL Group, 1995. Defined quality of life, QOL, as an individual's perception of their position in life, in the context of culture and value systems in which they live and in relation to their goals, expectations, standards and concerns. p. 1405. QOL is generally conceptualized as a multidimensional construct involving broad domains such as physical, mental and social well-being. Coghill, Dankertz, Sonuga-Bark, Sargent, and the ADHD European Guidelines Group, 2009, Davis et al., 2006, Iser and Morse, 2001. QOL also encompasses subjective and objective perspectives which are determined by personal appraisal and functional assessment, respectively. Iser and Morse, 2001, Sherlock, 2004. Health-related quality of life, HRQOL, is more specific than QOL, and defined as the impact of health, illness and disorder on QOL. Droder, 2004, Iser and Morse, 2001. Recently, QOL and HRQOL for children and adolescents have received greater attention in relation to the evaluation of treatment efficacy and well-being among pediatric populations with chronic and mental health conditions. Coghill et al., 2009. Upton, Lawford, and Iser, 2008. In pediatric trials and practice settings, QOL and HRQOL are viewed as gold standards, against which other health outcomes should be assessed. Cummins, 2005, Iser and Morse, 2001, Sherlock, 2004. Outcomes of QOL and HRQOL are used for the evaluation of clinical decision-making, cost-effectiveness, analyses of treatment and intervention, and strategies for improving treatment. Coghill et al., 2009, Matza, Swenson, Flood, Seknick, and Leidy, 2004, Simonoff et al., 2008. Varney et al., 2005. In public and healthcare service settings, QOL and HRQOL are utilized as a consumer's voice in the evaluation of healthcare system, service planning, and service management. Coghill et al., 2009, Matza et al., 2004, Simonoff et al., 2008. Varney et al., 2005. QOL and HRQOL also impacts on public policy, service delivery, principles and disability reform. Sherlock, 2004. To date, a number of generic QOL and HRQOL measures for children and adolescents with chronic diseases and mental health problems have emerged and developed, such as Child Health and Illness Profile, CHIP, Child Health Questionnaire, CHQ, and Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory, PEDSCAL. Coghill et al., 2009, Day, Landolt, and Moeller-Kuo, 2012, Iser and Morse, 2001. Pediatric QOL and HRQOL measures. 3. Involve at least one of two versions, self-report and proxy report. For children and adolescents who are too young, ill, or unable to respond themselves due to their impaired cognitive and linguistic ability, proxy ratings usually by parents, clinicians or teachers are provided. Iser and Morse, 2001. To the extent that QOL and HRQOL are subjective, it is necessary to be assessed from the child's perspective based on self-rating wherever possible. Coghill et al., 2009, Iser and Morse, 2001, Matza et al., 2004. Although proxy reports may be valuable and accurate, proxy ratings are based on parents' point of views which are affected by their own well-being and experiences, well as expectations of their children. Iser and Morse, 2001. It is important to determine relationships between self and proxy ratings depending on age, developmental stage and health status. Bouman, Coote, Van Gils, and Verhulst, 1999. Iser and Morse, 2001, Matza et al., 2004. Due to the increasing recognition of the value of self-reports, there is a need to develop appropriate QOL and HRQOL measures for children and adolescents. Crimeans et al. 2006, Matza et al. 2004. The appropriateness of the instruments, including the wording, sentence, structure, content, response scales and presentation styles, are determined by the chronological and developmental age and types of disorder. Crimeans et al. 2006, Matza et al. 2004. Several studies examined different response scales, i.e., Likert scales, facial expression, and visual analog scales, and presentation styles, i.e., written, pictorial, verbal, and computerized. Crimeans et al. 2006. It is evident that the child-friendly formatting and presentation of the measures is likely to improve the completion rate and reliability of self-reports. Coghill et al. 2009. Research on pediatric QOL and HRQOL has primarily highlighted chronic and acute diseases, but little attention has been given to psychiatric disorders. Matza et al. 2004. To date, research that investigated QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents with mental health problems, particularly ADHD. Coghill et al. 2009, Dankertz et al. 2010, Day et al. 2012, Pongwillaert, Lauthranu, Charnsel, and Wittunchart 2005, Varney and Burwinkle 2006. Bastiansen, Koot, Bongers, Varney and Verhulst 2004 reported that children with psychiatric disorders had impaired QOL compared to healthy children. Another study by Bastiansen, Koot, Ferdinand and Verhulst 2004 compared QOL scores between child psychiatric disorders such as attention deficit and disruptive behavior disorders, anxiety disorders, pervasive developmental disorders (PDDs), and 4. Mood disorders. The results showed that QOL ratings by clinicians were lower in children with PDDs, so-called ASDs, including autistic disorder and Asperger disorder, than other psychiatric disorders. Bastiansen, Koot, Ferdinand, et al. 2004. The higher prevalence of children and adolescents with ASDs and the increasing necessity of healthcare services for this population are widely recognized. Elsabaget al. 2012, Plymley 2007. Nevertheless, there are a limited number of studies on QOL and HRQOL conducted in children and adolescents with ASDs. Plymley 2007 identified that specific considerations of QOL for individuals with ASDs were necessary across a number of domains, such as physical well-being, emotional well-being, social inclusion, interpersonal relations, personal development, self-determination, rights and material well-being. Taking account of the specific characteristics and issues for children and adolescents with ASDs, the general concept of QOL and HRQOL may not be relevant to this population. Consequently, measurement of QOL and HRQOL for use in children and adolescents with ASDs may need to be examined and designed specifically for this population. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Food and Drug Administration FDA 2009, made several recommendations on research design for the modification of patient-reported outcome instruments. 1. A small non-randomized study, to compare the distribution of responses between different versions. 2. A qualitative study, to confirm content validity in a new population. 3. A small randomized study, to ascertain the measurement properties in the new population. pp. 20-21. It is also important that the research identifies the intended population and condition to use for the instrument. FDA 2009. In keeping with this guideline, the present research on the development of QOL measurement for use in children and adolescents with ASDs or mild intellectual disability, MID, were undertaken. The research question, what is an appropriate QOL measurement for children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, was developed to address the gap in research and 5. Practice. The aim of this research was to initiate the development of a tool that could be used by children and adolescents with ASDs or MID to communicate perspectives of their QOL. In order to achieve this aim, two objectives were established. 1. To examine the content validity of a child self-report QOL inventory, pediatric quality of life inventory TM, PEDScale 4.0 generic core scales, among children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. 2. To develop a child self-report QOL inventory, based on the PEDScale items, appropriate for children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. Thesis rationale. This research is part of a larger project, SNAP, for health, special children, nutrition, activity, and participation, to be implemented in partnership with special needs schools, teachers and families. The program is a school-based intervention that aims to improve health and well-being in children with cognitive disability. The development of a valid and reliable child self-report of QOL is needed to evaluate the effectiveness of the intervention with relation to the improvement of overall health and well-being among this population. However, we identified a gap in the literature regarding the use of appropriate child self-reports of QOL in this population. In particular, there is little research on the validation of QOL measures using a qualitative research approach. The examination of this issue will be beneficial specifically to vulnerable populations. Children and Adolescents with Cognitive Disability, Sullivan, Bolyai, Bova, and Harper. 2005. Thus, this research was aimed to initiate the development of a tool that could be used by children and adolescents with cognitive disability, specifically autism spectrum disorders or mild intellectual disability, to communicate perspectives of their QOL. Choice of research design. A qualitative descriptive study was employed to answer the research question, what is an appropriate QOL measurement for children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders, ASDs, or mild intellectual disability, MID. A qualitative descriptive study is suitable for this research because 1. It aims to address the who, what and where of experiences and perceptions, which allows the researchers to obtain preliminary insight into and knowledge of 6. The development of a QOL instrument for children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. 2. The subjective perspective of a qualitative descriptive study is in concordance with the concept of QOL, which respect the informant's points of views and reflect their perspectives. 3. It can provide information on the important conception of QOL in children and adolescents with ASDs and MID beyond the existing confines which cannot be identified through a deductive quantitative approach. A qualitative descriptive study refers to an inductive and data-driven pragmatic study approach. It also embraces the concept of a naturalistic inquiry in which there are no pre-selection of variables to study, manipulation of variables and a priori commitment to any one theoretical view of a target phenomenon. Sandalowski, 2000, p. 337. A qualitative descriptive study is recognized as a categorical alternative to phenomenology grounded theory, ethnography or a narrative study. Neergaard, Olesen, Anderson, and Sondergaard, 2009, Sandalowski, 2000. In clinical and healthcare practice, a qualitative descriptive study is useful for the development of questionnaire and needs assessments due to the nature of rich and subjective information based on patients' points of view regarding health-related concerns and issues. Neergaard et al., 2009. Sullivan, Bolyai et al., 2005. In this research, a qualitative descriptive study was employed to effectively reflect participants' views on the development of the PEDSCAL child self-report. Choice of subjects. This research identified that children and adolescents with ASDs and ID were vulnerable in terms of physical, psychological and social impairments. Children and adolescents with ASDs have deficits in reciprocal social and emotional interactions, communication and flexibility of thought and behavior, which considerably impact on their well-being. Oppa, 2000, Plumley, 2007. According to Ministry of Health 2011, over a quarter of children and adolescents with ID had chronic diseases including coronary heart disease, chronic respiratory disease, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, cancer and morbid obesity. They also experienced difficulty participating in play, sports, 7, or games, and making friends. Ministry of Health 2005. Furthermore, the growing prevalence rate and service use of this population indicates an urgent need for a reliable self-appraisal of their QOL in the context of family, school and community. Elsabig et al., 2012, Ministry of Health 2011, Simonoff et al., 2008. In this research, participants were selected using sample of convenience and a purposive sampling technique. Sample of convenience is a non-probability sampling technique in which participants are selected due to their accessibility to the researcher. Marshall, 1996. Sample of convenience is useful for this research due to the limited number of available target population and time constraint. This technique was used in Phase 1, and both sample of convenience and a purposive sampling was applied in Phase 2. According to Sandalowski, 2000, a purposive sampling refers to a strategy to obtain individuals who are considered as information-rich for the aim of research. P. 338. In this study, 3 participants from Phase 1 were selected for Phase 2 study due to the parents' sufficient knowledge and experience in the area of ASDs or ID. Choice of data collection methods. Focus groups and interviews were employed to collect a variety of in-depth data regarding the appropriateness of the PEDSCAL self-reports for use in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. These methods are recommended in a qualitative, descriptive approach in order to identify key aspects of the who, what and where of experiences and perceptions of participants. Neergaard et al. 2009, Sandalowski 2000. Taking into account of the unique characteristics of ASDs and MID such as impaired psychosocial functioning. Plumley 2007, Sherlock 2004. Focus groups and interviews are suitable to discover underlying problems pertinent to their QOL. The combination of focus groups and interviews are advantageous due to the scope to obtain a broad range of information through focus groups and attain more specific and detailed opinions, experiences and feedback through interviews. Morgan, 1996. Choice of measure. On the basis of available literature and student and supervisors' discussions, it was agreed that the Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory TM, PEDSCAL 4.0 Generic Core Scales Child 8. Self-report was the most suitable QOL instrument for use in children and adolescents with cognitive disability. The PEDSCAL 4.0 Generic Core Scales was initially designed for healthy children and adolescents and those with acute and chronic health conditions. Barney, N.D. Recently, the PEDSCAL Child Self-Report has been used in children and adolescents with psychiatric disorders and established its psychometric properties such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Bastiansen, Koot, Bongers, et al. 2004, Bastiansen, Koot, Ferdinand, et al. 2004, Pongwillerit et al. 2005, Sawyer et al. 2002, Varney and Burwinkle 2006, and Autism Spectrum Disorders, ASDs, or Pervasive Developmental Disorders PDD, Bastiansen, Koot, Ferdinand, et al. 2004, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman, Sheldrick, and Perrin, 2011. However, lack of information on psychometric properties and mixture of other psychometric disorders were always problematic for identifying the findings in children and adolescents with ASDs and MID. In addition, there is little evidence that the content appropriateness of the PEDSCAL Child Self-Report was qualitatively analyzed and verified for use in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. Choice of analysis. This research conducted content and thematic analyses to identify key themes and categories from data in Phase 1 and 2. Content analysis is a way to analyze the manifest as well as latent content of data reflectively and interactively, and it yields a straight descriptive summary of the patterns of data. Neergaard et al. 2009. Sandalowski, 2000. However, it also implies lack of interpretation of the meaning of data. Neergaard et al. 2009, Sandalowski, 2000. In order to move beyond description and produce an in-depth conceptual description and understanding the meaning of data, thematic analysis was employed. Neergaard et al. 2009, Sandalowski, 2000. In relation to this research, content analysis provides knowledge and a practical strategy for developing the PEDSCAL self-report for use in children with ASDs or MID. In contrast, thematic analysis provides a rich and detailed account of data from focus groups and interviews regarding the appropriateness of the PEDSCAL self-report for use in children with ASDs or MID. Therefore, content analysis was conducted to identify key factors which impact on the appropriateness of the PEDSCAL questionnaire by abstracting meaning units within the data set. Ello and Kingas, 2008, Grainheim and Lundman, 2004. 9. Thematic analysis was used to interpret insight and perception of children with ASDs or MID and their parents towards the PEDSCAL questionnaire by identifying themes, patterns or implications within the data set. Braun and Clark, 2006. Originality of the thesis. Over the last decade, the incorporation of quality of life QOL and health-related quality of life HRQOL assessment in clinical practice and healthcare services has been highlighted to enhance patient health and healthcare utilization as well as the efficacy. Healthcare programs and interventions. Coghill et al. 2009, Varney et al. 2005. In pediatric clinical practice, the value of QOL and HRQOL measurement is broader. Psychosocial outcomes, Matza et al. 2004, and patient-reported outcomes. Pros. Barney et al. 2005, has been acknowledged in terms of children's right to express their own views and participate in medical treatment and healthcare services. Crimeans et al. 2006, United Nations Children's Fund, 2005, and cost-effectiveness of treatments. Coghill et al. 2009, Tilford et al. 2012. Consequently, QOL and HRQOL have been considered as gold standard of patients' outcomes, and there has been an emerging body of literature on QOL and HRQOL instruments to accurately elicit patients' perspectives. This research is unique in terms of the use of qualitative research approach, namely qualitative description, instead of quantitative research method to assess the content validity of QOL and HRQOL measures. A qualitative research approach is suitable for vulnerable populations such as children and adolescents with cognitive disability to obtain rich and valuable data and describe their perception and experience of their world. This approach is particularly important to identify the needs of children and adolescents with cognitive disability, which is different from other populations. The development of QOL and HRQOL measures using qualitative descriptive study design is a holistic approach to take account of not only individual characteristics, e.g. developmental change, but also environmental attributes, e.g. cultural issues. 10. Thesis organization. This thesis consists of 6 chapters, see Figure 1.1. Chapter 2 is the critical review of the literature for the thesis on measurement of QOL in children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders. The review aims to examine the appropriate QOL and HRQOL measurement for children and adolescents with ASDs and identify strengths and limitations of QOL and HRQOL instruments for use in this population. Chapter 3 presents the research methods that were utilized for the study. This chapter outlines the research design, sampling, data collection methods, procedure and data analysis that were employed. The development of the pediatric quality of life inventory TM, PEDScale 4.0 generic core scales child self-report will also be explicated in this chapter. Chapter 4 synthesizes and interprets the key findings from the focus group discussions and interviews. Chapter 5 discusses and reflects on these key findings in relation to pertinent literature. Chapter 6 summarizes these key findings and evaluate their significance in regards to its limitations and implications. Recommendations for further research are also provided. Figure 1.1. Thesis structure. 11. Chapter 2. Literature review. Measurement of quality of life in children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders, a critical review. Summary. Measurement of quality of life QOL, and health-related quality of life HRQOL, is important in monitoring well-being in children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders ASDs. In this review, the aim is to investigate the characteristics of QOL and the appropriateness of QOL measures in children and adolescents with ASDs. Medline. Cinol Plus with full text and Spordiscus with full text via EBSCO Health. Database, PsycInfo and ProQuest Health and Medicine, up to February 2013. Databases were searched and articles were identified. The following inclusion criteria were used: articles which reported original research and measured QOL in children and adolescents with ASDs, and participants aged 5 to 18 years. Searches were limited to articles from peer-reviewed journals, in English, and those available in full text. Additional limitations by document type, i.e. article, and subject, i.e. humans, child, adolescent, children and youth, autism, autistic disorder and Asperger syndrome to the ProQuest Health and Medicine. The search identified 10,166 titles. 32 articles were selected for full review and 10 met the inclusion criteria. The review identified a number of QOL measures in children and adolescents with ASDs. The most commonly used instrument was the Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory TM, PEDScale 4.0 generic core scales. Self-reports were uncommon and the reliability and validity of QOL measures were not sufficiently reported for this population. Large discrepancies were found between self-reports and proxy reports. Despite the differences in study design and methodological quality, there was consistency in the results among studies, in that children and adolescents with ASDs provided lower QOL scores, particularly for social domains, compared to their healthy counterparts. From this review, future research 12 should focus on examining the appropriateness, reliability and validity of QOL Instruments for use in children and adolescents with ASDs. Introduction. Autism spectrum disorders, ASDs, are high-prevalent mental disorders of childhood and adolescence at the onset of an early age and impacts on the acquisition of developmental milestones. Philippic et al., 1999, Ozonif, Goodland Jones, and Solomon. 2005. The ASDs refer to a wide variety of cognitive and neurobehavioral-related disorders defined by three core symptoms: 1. Impairment in social interactions, 2. Impairment in verbal and nonverbal communication, and 3. Restricted, repetitive and stereotype patterns of behaviors, interests and activities. APA 2000. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 4th edition, DSM-IV. APA 2000, ASDs involves 5 possible diagnoses: autistic disorder, Asperger disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, Rett disorder, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, PDD-NOS, and atypical autism, which are consistent with the International Classification of Disease, 10th edition, ICD-10. World Health Organization, WHO, 2010. Individuals with ASDs often have psychiatric comorbidities such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, anxiety disorder, mood disorders, and oppositional defiant and conduct disorders. Brereton, Tonge, and Einfeld, 2006, Camp Becker et al., 2011, Simonoff et al., 2008. Although the nature of ASD's symptoms alters with age, ASDs have lifelong detrimental impacts on physical, mental, social and academic development, which, in turn, affect well-being of individuals with ASDs. Camp Becker et al., 2011, Ozonif et al., 2005. Rao, Beidel, and Murray, 2008. In children and adolescents with ASDs, psychosocial impairments such as social skills deficits, e.g. eye contact, impaired social competence, e.g. peer relationships, and limited social-emotional reciprocity permeate all domains of social, emotional and academic functioning in the course of everyday life. Not. Dunlop, and McKay, 2006, Ozonif et al., 2005, Rao et al., 2008. Quality of life, QOL, is defined as an individual's perception of their position in life, in the context of culture and value systems in which they live and in relation to their goals, expectations, standards and concerns. WHO QOL Group, 1995 p. 1405. The 13. Concept of QOL is multidimensional framework in which physical, psychological and social components are influenced by personal characteristics and environmental variables. Cummins, 2005, Sherlock, 2004. This concept is related to the definition of health, which refers to a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being in not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. WHO, 1946 p. 1315. Health-related quality of life, HRQOL, is more specific to the impact and characteristics of a particular illness, disorder and medical treatment on the daily functioning and well-being of a patient. Day et al., 2012, Droder, 2004, Limbers, Heffer, and Barney, 2009. For children and adolescents, child development stages are also important factors of their HRQOL. Day et al., 2012. QOL and HRQOL are measured by subjective personal appraisal as well as objective functional assessment, and regarded as gold standard instruments against which any other health outcomes should be assessed. Cummins, 2005, Iser and Morse, 2001, Sherlock, 2004. Subjective and objective measurement strategies. Encompass surveys, questionnaires, interviews and observations. Sherlock, 2004. In a pediatric population, QOL and HRQOL are predominantly measured by individual self-appraisal using questionnaires, although interviews and observations are occasionally integrated. Coghill et al., 2009, Davis et al., 2006, Iser and Morse, 2001. Matza et al., 2004. Several QOL and HRQOL generic instruments have been utilized to measure quality of life in children and adolescents with ASDs, such as the Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory. TM, Pedskel, Coulthau et al., 2010, Limbers et al., 2009, Sheldrick et al., 2011, Shipman et al., 2011, The World Health Organization Quality of Life Instrument. Abbreviated version, WHO QOL Bref, Jens Cousins, Magel Evans, and Koning. 2006, Camp Becker, Schroeder, Remschmidt, and Bachmann. 2010, The Inventar zur Verfassung der Lebensqualität bei Kindern und Jugendlichen, Ilk, Inventory for the Assessment of Quality of Life in Children and Adolescents, Camp Becker et al., 2011. The Quality of Communication Life Scale, QCL, Burgess and Terkstra, 2010. The Health Utilities Index 3, HUI 3, Tilford et al., 2012, and the Quality of Well-Being Self-Administered Scale, QWB SA, Tilford et al., 2012. Based on their conceptual frameworks, 3 measures PEDSCAL, WHO QOL BREF and ILK were designed for measuring health outcomes based on a multidimensional construct. Jens Cousins et al., 2006, Camp Becker et al., 2011, Camp Becker et al. 14. 2010, Coulthau et al., 2010, Lee, Harrington, Louis, and Newschafer, 2008, Limbers et al., 2009, Sheldrick et al., 2011, Shipman et al., 2011. 2 measures, HUI3 and QWB SA, were formulated to evaluate health economics such as cost-effectiveness. Tilford et al., 2012. 1 measure, QCL, was developed to assess the effects of communication disorders on communication. QOL, Burgess and Terkstra, 2010. Differences in the purpose of QOL measurement designs imply that QOL outcomes obtained by one measure may be less correlated with those attained by another measure. There is a need for a standard QOL and HR-QOL instrument for use with children and adolescents with ASDs. QOL and HR-QOL instruments for children and adolescents are mainly categorized into 2 versions, Child Self-Report and Parent Proxy Report. Considering that the QOL and HR-QOL construct is intrinsically subjective in nature and refers to an individual's perceptions and appraisal of their life, it is assumed that QOL and HR-QOL should preferably be assessed from a child's perspective. Coghill et al., 2009, Raven-Sieberer et al., 2006. However, there are general issues regarding the use of self-reports and specifically in relation to children with mental health problems. Age is one of the factors that influence a child's ability to provide an empirically reliable self-report on QOL and HR-QOL, Bell, 2007, Coghill et al., 2009, Matza et al., 2004. The age of a child with mental health conditions is strongly related to child developmental stages, specifically cognitive and language development. Coghill et al., 2009, Varney et al., 2005, Matza et al., 2004, reported that the level of language comprehension improved with a child's age. For example, children at the age of 5 are able to understand concrete concepts such as pain but may not be able to interpret subjective or abstract health-related notions such as emotional impact of illness. Coghill et al., 2009, Matza et al., 2004. Children and adolescents with psychiatric disorders have lower developmental age than their chronological age, and more difficulty to complete the age-matched self-reports. Coghill et al., 2009. This is not only because of their language impairments but also difficulties with memory and recall. Coghill et al., 2009. For children and adolescents with mental health problems, disorder-specific symptoms and impairments also affect QOL and HR-QOL assessment. For instance, children with autism may have problems in reporting on peer relationships due to their impaired social competence. Dankertz et al., 2010. In this regard, parent proxy reports provide 15. Supplemental information on a child's QOL and HR-QOL in a comprehensive and integrative manner. Dankertz et al., 2010, Matza et al., 2004. Still, it needs to be considered that several studies have reported that there are medium to large effect sizes between child self-reports and parent proxy reports in children and adolescents with psychiatric disorders. Dankertz et al., 2010, Camp Becker et al., 2011, Sheldrick et al., 2011, Varney and Burwinkle, 2006. Empirical evidence on QOL and HR-QOL in children and adolescents with ASDs may contribute to their well-being within diverse contexts of the family, school and community. It may also support and assist in developing strategies for health service planning. Ozonif et al., 2005 claimed that there were no QOL and HR-QOL measures that were designed for children and adolescents with ASDs. Moreover, no reviews were found comparing QOL and HR-QOL measures and outcomes from the instruments in children and adolescents with ASDs across studies. Thus, the aims of this review were 1. To critically review studies that measured QOL in children and adolescents with ASDs. 2. To examine the appropriate measurement of QOL and HR-QOL for children and adolescents with ASDs, and 3. To identify strengths and limitations of QOL and HRQOL measures in the existing literature for use in children and adolescents with ASDs. Methods. Search. A literature searches was conducted using Medline, Cinol Plus with full text, and Spordiscus with full text via EBSCO Health Database, PsycInfo and ProQuest Health and Medicine, from 1990 up to February 2013. Any studies that measured QOL or HRQOL in children and youth with autism spectrum disorders were searched through the databases. Searches were conducted using the following key terms: child *OR, youth OR, adolescent *OR, kid *OR, teenager *, and autis *OR, Canner *OR, Asperger *, and quality of life OR well *. Searches were limited to articles written in English full text or PDF full text peer-reviewed journal. Studies with children and adolescents between 5 and 18 years of age. Additional limitations were applied in the ProQuest Health and Medicine database document type. 16. Of article, subject of humans, child, adolescent, children and youth, autism, autistic disorder, and Asperger syndrome. Reference lists of relevant articles that were not captured by the search were consulted for additional materials. Study selection. All titles and abstracts were screened and evaluated for eligibility by the student, EI. The student and supervisor, EH and EI, fully reviewed articles and independently assessed full texts of eligible studies. Disagreements were reconciled by discussion. Studies were included for review if they met the following criteria: QOL or HRQOL in children or adolescents with ASDs were measured and reported. Articles were excluded if at least one of the following exclusion criteria was met: 1. QOL or HRQOL of parents of children with ASDs were reported. 2. Majority of participants were at an age other than 5 to 18 years. 3. Studies focused on children or adolescents with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, or other mental disorders. 4. Only functional assessments of social competence, social skills, relationships, friendship or emotional recognition and understanding were reported. 5. Symptoms of ASDs, sleep problems, anxiety or depression were only measured as QOL or HRQOL outcomes. Results. Study selection. The search process of study selection is outlined in Figure 2.1. The first search step identified 62,869 articles. After limiting to full-text, peer-reviewed journals, language of English and published year between 1990 and 2012, 18,379 titles remained. Additional limitations were applied to the ProQuest Health and Medicine by document type, i.e. article, and subject, i.e. humans, child, adolescent, children and youth, autism, autistic disorder and Asperger syndrome, and 10,166 titles left. Based on the titles and abstracts of these articles, 10,137 articles were discarded. The second search step of reference lists resulted in an additional 3 articles. These 3 articles and those 29 articles identified in the databases were retained for full review, and 10 articles met the inclusion criteria. 17. Figure 2.1. Flow diagram of the article selection process, minus removed, plus added. Data extraction. Characteristics of included studies were extracted in the following categories: source, methods, design, participants, age, gender and disability, measure QOL or HRQOL, and diagnosis, outcomes and study conclusions. Main attributes are summarized and presented in Table 2.1. The table was arranged alphabetically by first author and when more than one study was conducted by the same author, chronologically. 18. Table 2.1. Summary of included studies assessing quality of life and health-related quality of life in children and adolescents with ASDs. Source. Participants. QOL measure rater diagnostic measure main outcomes mean age plus or minus SD or range years. Burgess and Turkstra 2010. 14 adolescents with as 14 boys 16.87 plus or minus 1.93 15 typically developing adolescents 15 boys 15.88 plus or minus 2.06 QCL child parent. The total QCL ratings in the AS group was significantly lower than those in the typically developing TD group, P equals 0.01. The effect size between the AS and the TD groups was large and considered as clinically meaningful. The QCL total scores were higher in the as self-report than in his proxy report p equals 0.07. Jens, Cousins, Magel-Evans, and Koning. 2006. 12 adolescents with, as 12 boys, 20.3 plus or minus 1.3, 13 healthy adolescents, 13 boys, 20.5 plus or minus 1.3. WHOQOL. Bref. Child the overall QOL in the psychological, social and environment domain scores in adolescents with as were lower than those in healthy adolescents, S equals 0.45. The scores on social p equals 0.002, and physical health p equals 0.006, in adolescents with as were significantly lower than those in healthy adolescents. Camp Becker et al. 2011. 42 children with as HFA or AA 39. Boys, 3 girls, 12.7 plus or minus 2.6. Ilk child. Parent. ADOSG, VABS compared the mean LQ0 to 28B scores of the self-report and proxy report to a standard sample. The self-report score was at 47th, SD plus or minus 31.4 percentile and the proxy report score was at 33rd, SD plus or minus 27.6 percentile. Compared with a psychiatric sample, the self-report score was at 69th, SD plus or minus 28.0 percentile and the proxy report score was at 67th, SD plus or minus 29.9 percentile. There were no significant associations between the HRQOL and the ADOS summary score, and between the HRQOL and the VABS scores. 19. Camp Becker, Schroeder, Remschmidt, and Bachman. 2010. 26 adolescents and young adults with, as, HFA or AA 26. Boys, 21.6 plus or minus 3.4. WHOQOL. Bref. Child ADOSG, VABS. The social domain was the most impaired and had the lowest QOL score. Compared the mean QOL scores of patients with ASDs to a reference healthy sample, the scores were significantly lower in the physical, psychological and social domains and the overall score, p less than 0.001. Compared with a reference sample with SSD, the scores were significantly higher in the physical, psychological and environment domains. A significant correlation were found between the VABS domain of daily living skills and the QOL. Physical p equals 0.039, psychological p equals 0.030, and the summary p equals 0.012 scores. The VABS domain of daily living skills p equals 0.002, and the ADOSG summary score p equals 0.028 were optimum predictors of the total QOL score. Kulthau et al. 2010. 286 children with AD, as are PDD. NOS 236 boys, 50 girls, 2 to 18. PED scale 4.0. Generic core scales. Parent Vineland 2, SRS. RBSR, CBCL. The total score for children with ASDs was significantly lower than the national norm for a healthy sample and for a chronic health condition sample p less than 0.001. Differences of the scores on social functioning between children with ASDs and with chronic condition, and between ASDs children and healthy children were significant. A significant association between the social functioning scores and the Vineland 2 adaptive behavior composite scores was found. There were consistent negative correlations between the PED scale scores and the SRS scores, and between all PED scale except school functioning scores and the RBSR scores. The CBCL scores were negatively correlated with the PED scale scores. 20. Lee, Harrington, Louis, and Newschafer. 2008. 483 children with autism, 372 boys, 111 girls, 3 to 17. 6,319 children with ADD or ADHD, 4,549 boys, 1,769 girls, 3 to 17. 58,953 children without disabilities or mental conditions, 28,264 boys, 30,632 girls, 3 to 17. Quality of life. Parent children aged 3 to 5 with autism were less likely to attend a religious service than the unaffected control group p less than 0.05. Compared to the two comparison groups, the autism group aged 6 to 11 were more likely to repeat a grade and miss school for more than a week p less than 0.05, and less likely to attend a religious service and participate Inactivities, events p less than 0.05. Compared with the unaffected control group, the autism group aged 12 to 17 were more likely to repeat a grade and miss more than a week of school p less than 0.05, and less likely to attend a religious service, participate in activities, events and community service p less than 0.05. Limbers, Heffer, and Varney 2009. 22 children with IS. 20 boys, 2 girls. 9.25 plus or minus 2.15. PED scale 4.0. Generic core scales. Parent PEDSCLM. Cognitive functioning scale. ASDS. The scores of all HRQOL scales, except the missed Schulk, in children with IS were significantly lower than those in healthy children, p less than 0.001. Significant differences between healthy children and children with IS were found on the social functioning. The cognitive functioning was significantly correlated with the psychosocial health summary score S equals 0.77, and the school-related cognitive functioning S equals 0.76. The psychosocial health summary score S equals 0.59, and the school-related cognitive functioning S equals 0.50 were significantly correlated with the ASDS maladaptive scale. The effect size between the social functioning and the ASDS social scale was medium, S equals 0.30. 21. Sheldrick, Nedger, Shipman, and Perrin. 2011. 39 adolescents with ASDs, AD-PDD or AS, 73% boys. 27% girls, 14.8 plus or minus 1.9. PED scale 4.0. Generic core scales. Child, parent. The self-report scores were significantly correlated with the parent report scores on physical functioning p less than 0.01, school functioning p less than 0.05, and the total score p less than 0.05, and with the proxy report scores on all domains p less than 0.01, emotional functioning p less than 0.05, and the total score p less than 0.01. Correlations between the self-report and the proxy report were significant on the total score p less than 0.01, and social p less than 0.01, and school p less than 0.05. Functioning differences between the self-report scores and the parent report scores were significant for the total score p less than 0.01, and emotional p less than 0.01, social p less than 0.01, and school p less than 0.05. Functioning, and between the self-report scores and the proxy report scores were significant for the total score p less than 0.05, and emotional p less than 0.05, and social p less than 0.01. Functioning. Shipman, Sheldrick, and Perrin. 2011. 39 adolescents with ASDs, AD-PDD or AS, 73% boys. 27% girls, 14.8 plus or minus 1.9. PED scale 4.0. Generic core scales. Child, parent. RSCS, SMFQ. Scared. All scores of the self-report were below the normative mean p less than 0.05. The scores of the self-report were higher than those of the proxy report. Moderate to large positive correlations with the RSCS and moderate to large negative correlations with the scared and the SMFQ were reported. 22. Tilford et al. 2012. 150 children with AD-PDD-NOS or as 128 boys, 22 girls, 8.6 plus or minus 3.3. HUI3, QWB. SAW. Parent ADOS, Vineland. 2. Speech problems were the highest percentage of problem responses in both HUI3 and QWB. SAW. Problems in cognition, emotion and pain domains were found in the HUI3. The percentage of children who had confusion and memory loss on the QWB SAW was high. The HUI3 summary score was significantly correlated with all Vineland 2 domain scores, and the composite score, rho equals 0.373.552, p less than 0.001. The QWB SAW overall score was significantly correlated with the Vineland 2 composite, and all domains, except motor skill, scores, rho equals 0.212.248, p less than 0.001. Note, as equals Asperger syndrome. HFA equals high-functioning autism. AA equals atypical autism. AD equals autistic disorder. PDD-NOS equals pervasive developmental disorder. Not otherwise specified. AD equals attention deficit disorder. ADHD equals attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. PDD equals pervasive developmental disorder. ASDs equals autism spectrum disorders. SSD equals schizophrenia spectrum disorders. QCL equals quality of communication life scale. WHO QOL BREF equals World Health Organization quality of life instrument, abbreviated version. ILK equals Inventar zur Erfassung der Lebensqualität bei Kindern und Jugendlichen, inventory for the assessment of quality of life in children and adolescents. PEDSCAL equals Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory TM. HUI3 equals Health Utilities Index 3. QWB SAW equals Quality of Well-Being Self-Administered Scale. ADOSG equals Autism Diagnostic Observatory Schedule Generic. VABS equals Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales. Vineland 2 equals Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales, 2nd edition, survey interview form. SRS equals Social Responsiveness Scale. RBSR equals Repetitive Behavior Scale. Revised. CBCL equals Achenbach Child Behavior Checklist. ASDS equals Asperger Syndrome Diagnostic Scale. RSES equals Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale. SMFQ equals Short Mood and Feelings Questionnaire. Scared equals Screen for Child Anxiety-Related Emotional Disorders. ADOS equals Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. SD equals Standard Deviation. S equals Effect Size Cohen's D. A numbers might not add up to the total number due to missing values. BLQ 0 to 28 score shows the patient's HRQOL level. C Psychosocial Health Summary Score includes emotional functioning and social functioning scales, and school functioning summary score involves school-related cognitive functioning and missed school scales. 23. Coding of results. The age of participants in each study was determined from the reported mean or range. Results of studies for children and adolescents were synthesized due to the small number of studies. In 2 studies, Kulthau et al. 2010, Lee et al. 2008, a small percentage of children were of ages between 2 and 4 years, and the other 2 studies, Jens Cousins et al. 2006, Camp Becker et al. 2010, involved participants aged between 19 and 28 years. These studies were included in this review. The review also included 2 consecutive studies in which 2 different designs of reliability and validity studies of self-completed QOL were conducted. Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011. Demographic data from participants and the mean HRQOL scores from self and proxy reports were duplicated between these studies. In the included studies, approaches to assess QOL or HRQOL in children and adolescents with ASDs. Incorporated child self-reports, parent proxy reports and parent reports. Synthesis of results. Type of instruments for QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents with ASDs. A summary of QOL and HRQOL measurements that were used in the included studies is presented in Table 2.2. All 10 studies utilized questionnaires as a measure of QOL or HRQOL in children and adolescents with ASDs. 4 studies, Kulthau et al. 2010, Limbers et al. 2009, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011, used the Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory TM, PEDSCAL 4.0 Generic Core Scales. 2 studies, Jens Cousins et al. 2006, Camp Becker et al. 2010, used the World Health Organization Quality of Life Instrument, abbreviated version, WHO QOL BREF, and the other 4 studies used the Inventar zur Erfassung der Lebensqualität bei Kindern und Jugendlichen, ILK, inventory for the assessment of quality of life in children and adolescents. Camp Becker et al. 2011, the Quality of Communication Life Scale. QCL, Burgess and Turkstra, 2010, the Quality of Life, Lee et al. 2008, and the Health Utilities Index 3, HUI3, and the Quality of Well-Being Self-Administered Scale QWB. SAW Tilford et al. 2012. The Quality of Life is a selection of items from the National Survey of Children's Health in the U.S. which are considered relevant to QOL by Lee et al. 2008. 5 out of 7 QOL or HRQOL measures PEDSCAL, WHO QOL BREF. 24. ILK Quality of Life and HUI3 specified the age for use, and 3 of them PEDSCAL. ILK and Quality of Life were designed for children and adolescents, namely child age between 5 to 18 years. The number of items varied from 5 to 71. Some of the items are integrated into multidimensional domains. The domains ranged from 4 to 8, including physical PEDSCAL, WHO QOL BREF, ILK, HUI3 and QWB SAW, emotional, mental, psychological, PEDSCAL, WHOQOL BREF, ILK and HUI3, social PEDSCAL. WHOQOL BREF, ILK and QWB SAW, school, PEDSCAL and ILK, and communication. Speech QCL and HUI3. In terms of psychometric properties, the PEDSCAL was the only one in which both reliability and validity were established in children and adolescents with ASDs. 5 measures WHOQOL BREF, ILK, QCL, HUI3 and QWB SAW determined only validity, in which 3 of them reported reliability from the other studies. Neither reliability nor validity information was provided in the Quality of Life, Lee et al., 2008. The types of validity involved construct-related validity, including discriminant and convergent validity, and criterion-related validity such as concurrent validity. Reliability was classified into internal consistency and reproducibility, including test-retest reliability and inter-rater agreement. 25. Table 2.2. Generic quality of life and health-related quality of life instruments included in the review. Measure references report. Child age item domain. Reliability validic. Year, no, name. Pediatric quality of life. Inventory PEDSCAL 4.0. Generic core scale. Coulthau et al. 2010. Limbers et al. 2009. Sheldrick et al. 2011. And Shipman et al. 2011. Cell 5 to 18 C23 4 physical functioning internal consistency discriminant. Proxib 2 to 18 D emotional functioning inter-raterge convergent. Parent-EB social functioning concurrent. School functioning. World Health Organization quality of life instrument. Abbreviated version. WHOQOL BREF. Jens Cousins et al. 2006, and Camp. Becker et al. 2010. Self greater than 18 E24 4 physical health internal consistency J discriminant. Psychological health test reached convergent. Social relationships concurrent. Environment. Inventory for the assessment of quality of life in children and adolescents, ILK, Camp Becker et al. 2011. Self 61896 school internal consistency J discriminant. Proxy 61811 family test reached. Social relations with peers, hobbies and recreational activities. Physical health, mental health. 26. Quality of communication life. Scale QCL. Burgess and Turkstra. 2010. Self 18 total score inter-raterge discriminant. Proxy summary item. Quality of life Lee et al. 2008 Parent 355. 6117. 12177. Health Utilities Index 3. HUI 3. Tilford et al. 2012 Proxy greater than 5458 Vision discriminant. Hearing convergent. Speech. Ambulation. Dexterity. Cognition. Emotion. Pain. Quality of well-being. Self-administered scale. QWB SAW. Tilford et al. 2012 Proxy 71F4 Mobility discriminant. Physical activity. I convergent. Social activity. I. Symptoms. CPX. 27. Note, Agerman version, B proxy and parent versions use the same form, cages 5 to 7, young child, 8 to 12 child, and 13 to 18 teen, ages 2 to 4 toddlers, 5 to 7, young children, 8 to 12 children, and 13 to 18 teens. Each specific values from a reference sample are available for an age range between 18 and 85 years for the German version of the WHOQOL BREF. Few two conditions, sexuality and hangovers, in the CPX scale were excluded in the study. G summary scores include total scale score, 23 items, physical health summary score, physical functioning, 8 items, psychosocial health summary score, emotional, social, school functioning, 15 items, total score involves 17 items and summary item is a rating of overall QOL. In general, my quality of life is good, I functioning. Scale, J. The reliability of a measure was not determined in children and adolescents with ASDs but in other population. K. Discriminant validity and convergent validity are categories of construct-related validity, and concurrent validity is a type of criterion-related validity. 28. Agreement between child self-reports and parent ratings on QOL and HRQOL. 6 studies Burgess and Turkstra, 2010, Jens Cousins et al. 2006, Camp Becker et al. 2011, Camp Becker et al. 2010, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011, used. Self-reports, 7 studies Burgess and Turkstra, 2010, Camp Becker et al. 2011. Coulthau et al. 2010, Limbers et al. 2009, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011. Tilford et al. 2012, Applied Proxy Reports, and 2 studies, Lee et al. 2008, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Employed Parent Reports. 1 study, Sheldrick et al. 2011, investigated correlations between adolescent self-reports and parent proxy reports as well as standard parent reports. In this study, the same form was applied to proxy and parent versions. Parents were asked, how much of a problem has your teen had with, for the standard parent report, and pretending that you are your son or daughter, answer the following questions as you think they are answering them for the parent proxy report. Sheldrick et al. 2011. For the total PEDSCAL score, correlations between self-reports and standard parent reports, R equals 0.40, P less than 0.05, were lower than those between self-reports and parent proxy reports, R equals 0.58, P less than 0.01, Sheldrick et al. 2011. Differences between child self-ratings and standard parent and parent proxy ratings were large in the domains of emotional and social functioning, Sheldrick et al. 2011. 3 studies, Burgess and Turkstra 2010, Camp Becker et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011, compared child self-reports and parent proxy reports. In the ILC, the correlation between self and proxy reported HRQOL was medium, R equals 0.45, and the total LQ 0 to 28 scores between self and proxy reports were significantly different, P less than 0.000, Camp Becker et al. 2011. The total scores of quality of communication life and the summary item score of QOL in adolescents with Asperger syndrome were higher than those obtained from mother proxy reports, Burgess and Turkstra 2010. Nevertheless, the patterns of ratings from self and proxy reports were comparable, Burgess and Turkstra 2010. Similarly, the scores of the PEDSCAL emotional, social and school functioning scales in adolescents with ASDs were higher than the parent proxy scores, although the physical functioning scores were lower in the adolescents, Shipman et al. 2011. These consistent findings indicated that discrepancies between self-reports and parent proxy reports were large with regard to QOL and HRQOL ratings. 29. Comparison of QOL and HRQOL between ASDs and healthy or clinical samples. In 9 studies, Burgess and Turkstra 2010, Jens Cousins et al. 2006, Camp Becker et al. 2011, Camp Becker et al. 2010, Coulthau et al. 2010, Lee et al. 2008, Limbers et al. 2009, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011, QOL and HRQOL in children. Adolescents with ASDs were compared with those in a sample classified as healthy. 4 of these studies, Camp Becker et al. 2011, Camp Becker et al. 2010, Coulthau et al. 2010, Lee et al. 2008, also examined differences in QOL and HRQOL between children and adolescents with ASDs in clinical samples including psychiatric disorders, Camp Becker et al. 2011, schizophrenia spectrum disorder, Camp Becker et al. 2010, chronic health conditions, Coulthau et al. 2010, and attention deficit disorder, AD, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, Lee et al. 2008. 4 studies consistently found that total scores and all domains scores of the PEDSCAL in children and adolescents with ASDs were lower than those in an age-matched healthy sample, in which 2 studies used both self and proxy reports, Sheldrick et al. 2011. Shipman et al. 2011, and the others used only proxy reports, Coulthau et al. 2010. Limbers et al. 2009. In particular, the domain with the greatest difference between ASDs and healthy samples in proxy reports was social functioning, P less than 0.01, Coulthau et al. 2010, Limbers et al. 2009, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011. Likewise, 2 studies with WHO-QOL BREF self-reports revealed that adolescents with Asperger syndrome had lower scores on the overall and all domains compared to healthy individuals, and substantial differences were found in the domain of social relationships, Jens Cousins et al. 2006, Camp Becker et al. 2010. Other 3 studies showed that QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents with ASDs were worse compared to a healthy sample, Burgess and Turkstra 2010, Camp Becker et al. 2011, Lee et al. 2008. In comparison with chronic health condition normative populations, the proxy PEDSCAL scores were significantly lower on the total and emotional and social functioning Scales P less than 0.001, but similar on physical and school functioning scales. Kulthau et al. 2010. Parents reported that children with ASDs, specifically at the age between 6 and 11 years, had more problems with school life and activity participation compared to children with ADD or ADHD. Lee et al. 2008. Compared with a psychiatric sample. However, self-reported HRQOL was better in children and adolescents with ASDs. 30. Camp Becker et al. 2011. In the WHO QOL BREF self-reports, adolescents with ASDs had higher scores on physical health, psychological health and environment domains, and similar scores on social relationships compared to schizophrenia. Spectrum disorder patients. Camp Becker et al. 2010. Relationships between subjective QOL and HRQOL measures and objective ASDs. Specific measures. 6 studies investigated correlations between QOL or HRQOL and ASDs. Specific symptoms and functional abilities. Camp Becker et al. 2011, Camp Becker et al. 2010, Kulthau et al. 2010, Limbers et al. 2009, Shipman et al. 2011, Tilford et al. 2012. Measures of ASD's specific symptoms were classified into diagnostic scales. Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, ADOS, Autism Diagnostic Observatory Schedule Generic, ADOSG, and Asperger Syndrome Diagnostic Scale, ASDS, and Behavior Scales, Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales, VABS, Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales, 2nd edition, Survey Interview Form, Vineland 2, Repetitive Behavior Scale Revised, RBSR, and Achenbach Child Behavior Checklist, CBCL. There were no significant correlations between autism diagnostic scales, ADOS and ADOSG, and QOL or HRQOL measures, HUI3, ILK, QWB SAW, and WHO QOL. Bref. Camp Becker et al. 2011, Camp Becker et al. 2010, Tilford et al. 2012. The PEDSCAL Physical Health Summary Score showed a medium correlation with the ASDS Sensorimotor Scale, Effect Size, S, equals 0.35, and the PEDSCAL Psychosocial Health Summary Score, S equals -0.59, and School-Related Cognitive Functioning, S equals -0.50. Were significantly associated with the ASDS Maladaptive Scale, Limbers et al. 2009. Some significant correlations between QOL or HRQOL measures, HUI3, ILK, PEDSCAL, QWB SAW and WHO QOL BREF, and behavior scales, VABS, Vineland 2, CBCL and RBSR, were found. The Vineland 2 composite score was significantly correlated with the PEDSCAL social functioning, beta equals 0.34, p less than 0.001, HUI3, rho equals 0.52, p less than 0.001, and QWB SAW, rho equals 0.25, p less than 0.001, Kulthau et al. 2010, Tilford et al. 2012. The VABS daily living skills was significantly associated with the WHO QOL BREF physical health, R equals 0.43, p equals 0.04, psychological health, R equals 0.45, p equals 0.03, and overall score, R equals 0.52, p equals 0.01, Camp Becker et al. 2010. However, there were no significant correlations between VABS and ILK. Camp Becker et al. 2011. The PEDSCAL scales had 31 significantly negative correlations with the CBCL p less than 0.01 and RBSR p less than 0.01 scales. Kulthau et al. 2010. Instruments for assessing functional impairments related to ASDs involved cognitive scale, PEDSCAL cognitive functioning scale, emotional scales, Rosenberg self-esteem scale, RSCS, short mood and feelings questionnaire, SMFQ, and screen for child anxiety-related emotional disorders, SCARED, and social scale, social responsiveness scale, SRS. The PEDSCAL cognitive functioning scale was significantly correlated with the self-rated PEDSCAL total score, S equals 0.61, p less than 0.05. Psychosocial health, S equals 0.77, p less than 0.001. Social functioning, S equals 0.53, p less than 0.05. School functioning, S equals 0.75, p less than 0.01, and school-related cognitive functioning, S equals 0.76, p less than 0.01, Limbers et al. 2009. The self-reported PEDSCAL on all domains were also significantly correlated with the RSCS, SMFQ and SCARED, Shipman et al. 2011. A. Positively moderate to large association with RSCS, R equals 0.36 to 0.74, and negatively moderate to large correlations with scared, R equals -0.35 to -0.69, and SMFQ, R equals -0.45 to 0.72, were found. Shipman et al. 2011. All domains of the proxy-reported PED scale were negatively correlated with the SRS, particularly with the largest coefficients for the total psychosocial and social scales. Coulthau et al. 2010. Discussion. The review found that QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents with ASDs was significantly poorer than the general pediatric population. Burgess and Turkstra 2010. Jens Cousins et al. 2006, Camp Becker et al. 2011, Camp Becker et al. 2010. Coulthau et al. 2010, Lee et al. 2008, Limbers et al. 2009, Sheldrick et al. 2011. Shipman et al. 2011. Particularly, children and adolescents with ASDs and their parents perceived that social domains, e.g. social support, personal relationships and peer relationships, were the most problematic. Jens Cousins et al. 2006, Camp Becker et al. 2010, Coulthau et al. 2010, Limbers et al. 2009, Sheldrick et al. 2011. Shipman et al. 2011. Although 6 out of 10 studies. Burgess and Turkstra 2010. Jens Cousins et al. 2006, Camp Becker et al. 2011, Camp Becker et al. 2010. Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011, used child self-reports. 8 out of 10 studies utilized parent ratings to measure QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents. 32. With ASDs. Burgess and Turkstra 2010, Camp Becker et al. 2011, Coulthau et al. 2010, Lee et al. 2008, Limbers et al. 2009, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011. Tilford et al. 2012. However, there was consistent evidence across studies that self-reporting QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents with ASDs were significantly different from parent proxy reporting QOL and HRQOL. Burgess and Turkstra 2010. Camp Becker et al. 2011, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011. The PED scale, which involved both self and proxy reports and established psychometric properties, was the most commonly used. Coulthau et al. 2010, Limbers et al. 2009, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011. In this section, the appropriateness and limitations of the QOL and HRQOL instruments in children and adolescents with ASDs are discussed. Implications and recommendations for future QOL research are also provided. Appropriate measurement of QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents with ASDs. Considering the definition of QOL, 3 instruments PEDScale, WHO QOL Bref and ILK, embrace the most common domains of QOL and HRQOL which refer to physical, mental, emotional, psychological and social functioning. Cummins, 2005, Shalak. 2004, WHO QOL Group, 1995. The other measures contained at least one of the domains, which implied that there was inconsistency across the instruments with regard to the domains of QOL and HRQOL. Children and adolescents with ASDs scored lower than those without ASDs on the social domain measured by the PEDScale and WHO QOL Bref. Jens Cousins et al. 2006, Camp Becker et al. 2010, Coulthau et al. 2010, Limbers et al. 2009, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011. Considering that every social context such as the family, peer groups, school and community are likely to contribute to children's life. Matza et al. 2004, it is also critical to assess QOL and HRQOL of children and adolescents with ASDs within their relevant contexts. Due to the fact that QOL and HRQOL measures consist of a multidimensional construct and different scales and items, it is difficult to directly compare QOL and HRQOL across the instruments. Coghill et al. 2009. The value of self-completed reports of QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents with mental health conditions was highlighted in several studies. Coghill et al. 2009. Dankertz et al. 2010, Day et al. 2012, Matza et al. 2004. This trend originated from 2 main aspects: the importance of children's rights to reflect their own perspectives. 33. On medical treatment. Coghill et al. 2009, Crimines et al. 2006, United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, 2005, and considerable disagreement between child self-reports and parent proxy reports on QOL and HRQOL. Coghill et al., 2009, Dankertz et al., 2010, Matza et al., 2004. The findings from this review showed that children and adolescents with ASDs were likely to have different perspectives of QOL and HRQOL from their parents, which can be captured by only self-reports. Burgess and Terkstra, 2010, Camp Becker et al., 2011, Sheldrick et al., 2011, Shipman et al., 2011. In the included studies, 4 measures PEDSCAL, WHO QOL BREF, ILK and QCL incorporated child self-reports, and 2 of them PEDSCAL and ILK were specifically designed for children and adolescents for ages between 5 and 18 years. In terms of a child-appropriate QOL and HRQOL measure, it is critical that the questionnaire is formulated and validated for children and adolescents depending on their age, disorder, and developmental stages. Coghill et al., 2009, Matza et al., 2004. However, all studies utilized generic QOL and HRQOL measures for children and adolescents with ASDs. And there were no QOL and HRQOL measures that were specifically developed for this population. The review identified that almost all QOL and HRQOL measures failed to establish psychometric properties for children and adolescents with ASDs, see Table 2.2. According to Lohr 2002, QOL and HRQOL instruments are required to establish reliability, i.e. internal consistency and reproducibility including test-retest reliability, an inter-rater agreement, and validity, i.e. content-related, construct-related and criterion-related validity. Within the 7 measures, only the PEDSCAL met both criteria of reliability and validity for children and adolescents with ASDs, although reproducibility and content-related validity have not been established for this population. The WHO QOL BREF met criteria of validity, but no evidence was found regarding reliability in the ASDs population. The ILK, QCL, HUI3 and QWB SAW demonstrated only construct-related validity such as discriminant and convergent validity. No information of psychometric properties was provided regarding the quality of life. Lee et al., 2008. Some of the studies reported the reliability and validity of the instruments based on the previous research, which did not include children and adolescents with ASDs. For example, Bastiansen, Koot, Bongers et al., 2004, reported all criteria of the reliability, with the exception of reproducibility, and validity of the PEDSCAL in children 34 with psychiatric disorders. As the study did not identify what kind of psychiatric disorders were included, it is difficult to determine the psychometric properties of the PEDSCAL specifically for children and adolescents with ASDs. Consequently, there was little evidence that the QOL and HRQOL measures were reliable for use in children and adolescents with ASDs. Differentiation between QOL, health status and functional status. 6 studies examined correlations between QOL or HRQOL measures and clinical measures. Camp Becker et al., 2011, Camp Becker et al., 2010, Coulthau et al., 2010. Limbers et al., 2009, Shipman et al., 2011, Tilford et al., 2012. Significant correlations, and at least medium effect sizes with clinical measures demonstrate the convergent validity of QOL and HRQOL questionnaires. Bastiansen, Koot, Bongers, et al., 2004. Heiser and Morse, 2001. The PEDSCAL was significantly correlated with ASDs-related measures of symptoms, i.e. ASDs, Vineland 2, RBSR and CBCL, and functional impairments, i.e. PEDSCAL cognitive functioning, RSCS, SMFQ, SCARED and SRS. Coulthau et al., 2010, Limbers et al., 2009, Shipman et al., 2011. These findings showed the convergent validity of the PEDSCAL, but may also be interpreted that the PEDSCAL has items that overlap with symptoms and functional impairments of ASDs. However, health status, which refers to the presence or absence of symptoms, and functional impairment, which refers to an objective measurement of impact on functioning, need to be differentiated from QOL, which is defined as self-perception of well-being. Coghill et al., 2009, Droder, 2004. Although these correlations between QOL, symptoms and impairments do not necessarily imply that both items are identical constructs or factors, there may be the risk that QOL outcomes are used interchangeably. For health status and functional impairments, Coghill et al. 2009, Droder 2004. However, subjective QOL and HRQOL measures need to be disentangled from objective assessment of symptoms and functional impairment, as the concepts of QOL and HRQOL are different from those of health and functional status. Coghill et al. 2009, Davis et al. 2006, Droder 2004, Smith, Avis, and Assman, 1999. In children and adolescents with ASDs, this issue may be caused by a respondent's confusion between their perceptions of think and feel and their conditions of is and can due to deficiency in recognition of their self-insight. Coghill et al. 2009, Mitchell and O'Keefe 2008. 35. Another possibility may result from lacking the precise wording of the questions which refer to distinctions between psychopathology, e.g., are you feeling happy, and QOL, e.g., are you feeling as happy as you think you should. Coghill et al. 2009. It is not clear from the findings that the wording of each questionnaire is comprehensible to children and adolescents with ASDs to report their perceptions independently of their symptoms and impairments. Considering that children and adolescents with ASDs have impaired cognitive and language abilities, their interpretation and understanding of the questions may be different from other populations. Implications and recommendations for future studies. This review showed that the PED scale was the most commonly used in children and adolescents with ASDs and established reliability and validity in the ASDs population. In this regard, the PED scale exhibited substantial contribution toward measuring QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents with ASDs. The PED scale would be advantageous to this population in terms of a simple structure, i.e. 4 scales and 3 summary scores, the length of the questionnaire, i.e. 23 items, age-appropriate versions, i.e. young child, child and teen, and established psychometric properties, i.e. reliability and validity. However, it is not clear that the same wording, formatting and design of the PED scale questionnaire are relevant to children and adolescents with ASDs, considering their unique mental and cognitive functioning. Furthermore, the reliability and validity of the PED scale may need to be established for children and adolescents with ASDs across the wide range of age and different levels of disability. Future research should investigate the content appropriateness, accuracy and trustworthiness of the self-reported PED scale for use in children and adolescents with ASDs. Limitations. Due to scant research regarding QOL and HRQOL in children and adolescents with ASDs within which different methodologies, i.e. data analyses, and instruments, i.e. QOL, HRQOL, clinical and cognitive measures, had been applied, it was not possible to compare QOL and HRQOL measures and outcomes among studies. In some studies, it was not clearly described which versions of the QOL and HRQOL instrument, e.g. age specific reports, were used in the studies. In addition, there was a deficiency of 36. Information about the reliability and validity of the QOL and HRQOL measures in children and adolescents with ASDs. With the exception of 3 studies, ASDs samples, N equals 150, 286 and 483, Coulthau et al. 2010, Lee et al. 2008, Tilford et al. 2012, sample sizes of the individual study were small, ASDs samples, N equals 12 to 42. Participants in the studies were predominantly boys and without intellectual disability. For example, high-functioning autism and Asperger syndrome, IQ greater than 70. Conclusions. This review demonstrated that children and adolescents with ASDs experienced lower levels of QOL and HRQOL across a variety of domains. In particular, children and adolescents with ASDs showed lower scores in the domain of social functioning, which is one of the characteristics of ASDs. Considerable differences between self and proxy reported QOL and HRQOL emphasized the importance and development of self-report in children and adolescents with ASDs. From this review, the PED scale seemed to be an appropriate QOL and HRQOL measure for use in children and adolescents with ASDs. It is vital for future research to investigate further psychometric properties and the content appropriateness of the PED scale self-report for use in children and adolescents with ASDs. 37. Chapter 3, Methods. Research Design. This research was a qualitative descriptive study, Neergaard et al. 2009, Sandalowski 2000, and consisted of 2 phases, Phase 1 and Phase 2, see Figure 3.1. Participants were recruited through a special school and a school with a special unit in Auckland region and via two service providers, the New Zealand branch of Centre for Autism and Related Disorders and the Wilson Home Trust, also located in Auckland. 2 children with autism spectrum disorders, ASDs, or mild intellectual disability. 10 parents and 3 teachers participated in Phase 1. 2 focus group discussions and 2 individual interviews were conducted at the special school and at the university. The participants were provided with the Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory TM Child Self-Report, i.e. the original PEDSCAL questionnaire, and asked about their experiences, knowledge and perception in relation to the original PEDSCAL questionnaire. Data from the focus groups and interviews were analyzed using content and thematic analyses. On the basis of the findings from Phase 1, the original PEDSCAL questionnaire was modified for use in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, i.e. the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. The amendment of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire encompassed wording, response scales, format and presentation. In Phase 2, 8 children with ASDs and their parents, n=9, participated in individual interviews. After the administration of the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire with the children and adolescents, they and their parents were interviewed regarding the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. Content and thematic analyses were conducted for identifying key themes and categories from the interviews. Mean and standard deviation of time for completion and completion rates of the modified PEDSCAL were reported. 38. Participants data collection 1 data analysis 1 development of the PEDSCAL participants data collection 2 data analysis 2 children 2 focus groups content analysis modification 8 children 7 interviews content analysis 10 parents 2 interviews thematic analysis 9 parents thematic analysis 3 teachers. The original PEDSCAL the modified PEDSCAL. Phase 1 Phase 2. Wording. Response options. Visuals. Presentation. Figure 3.1. Qualitative descriptive research design. Phase 1. 15 participants were recruited using convenience sampling, and focus groups and semi-structured interviews were employed for data collection. See Figure 3.1. The original PEDSCAL questionnaire was provided to the participants as the main topic of the discussions or interviews. A facilitator and an interviewer led the focus groups and interviews with a couple of open-ended questions about the appropriateness of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire. The data were analyzed using content and thematic analysis techniques to identify key themes and categories. After the data analysis, the modification of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire was conducted regarding wording, response options, formatting and presentation style. Phase 2. After the modification of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire, 17 participants including children and adolescents and their parents were recruited for individual interviews using convenience and purposive sampling. See Figure 3.1. The modified PEDSCAL was first trialed by the children and adolescents, and then an interviewer asked the parents and children about the appropriateness and effectiveness of the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. Content and thematic analyses were undertaken for data analysis. 39. Sampling. This research employed sample of convenience and purposive sampling techniques. Convenience sampling involves recruiting the most accessible individuals, while a purposive sampling selects individuals who are information-rich for the aim and purpose of the study. Marshall, 1996, Sandalowski, 2000, p. 338. In Phase 1, convenience sampling was utilized due to time constraints and the small number of possible key informants who involved children, parents and teachers. Children, parents, and teachers were considered as important informants able to provide holistic knowledge regarding the children's quality of life at home, school and other environments. In Phase 2, in addition to convenience sampling, purposive sampling was also used to obtain effective feedback on the modification of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire. Children and their parents were identified as key informants who were able to provide knowledge regarding themselves, children, and their children. 3. Participants whom the researchers identified as key informants based on the child's age and types, i.e. autistic disorder or Asperger syndrome, and levels of disability, i.e. mild to moderate, were asked to participate in interviews in Phase 2. With regard to sample size, Marshall, 1996, described that an appropriate sample size for a qualitative study is one that adequately answers the research question. P. 523. Lewis, Kellett, Robinson, Fraser and Ding, 2004, also suggested that a small sample Size is preferable in a qualitative descriptive research. Considering that few new themes and categories emerged between phase 1 and 2, the data saturation were likely to be reached and depth of data were obtained from both phases. Therefore, the total of 15 and 17 participants from each phase was appropriate. Participants were included if 1. Children or an adolescents were at the age between 5 and 18, 2. Children or adolescents had clinical diagnosis of ASDs, and 3. Children and adolescents were not diagnosed as ASDs but had mid-approximate IQ greater than 50, APA. 2000, WHO 2010. However, children and adolescents or their parents were excluded. If 1. Children and adolescents had not been diagnosed as ASDs but had moderate, severe and profound intellectual disability, approximate IQ less than 50, APA 2000, WHO 2010, and 2. Children and adolescents had physical impairments. The diagnosis and severity of ASDs or ID which were assessed by specialists such as pediatricians. 40. Psychiatrists or clinical psychologists were reported by parents, guardians or teachers of special needs school, following consent from parents. Additionally, specialists and teachers' advice and judgment on the eligibility of children and adolescents for this research were considered to determine their participation. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 4th edition, DSM-IV, APA 2000. ASDs involves 6 diagnoses of autistic disorder, Asperger disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, Rett disorder, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, PDD-NOS, and atypical autism, which are consistent with the International Classification of Disease, 10th edition, ICD-10, WHO 2010. In this research, autistic disorder, i.e. autism, autism spectrum disorder and high-functioning autism, and Asperger disorder, i.e. Asperger syndrome, were identified under the diagnosis of ASDs. Characteristics of participants are shown in tables 3.1 Phase 1 and 3.2 Phase 2. Children and adolescents who participated in Phase 1 and 2 varied in terms of age and disability levels, but resembled each other in terms of gender and types of disability. Table 3.1. Descriptive characteristics of participants in Phase 1. Form participant, N, child disability. Focus group. 1. Children, 2. Parents, 4. Teachers, 3. GDDP, epilepsy, C. ADHD, P. 2. Parents, 4. ASDP, Down syndrome, P. Interview. 1. Parent, 1. ASDP. 2. Parent, 1. ASD, HFAP, ADHD, C, as, C. Note. N equals number. GDD equals global developmental delay. ADHD equals attention deficit. Hyperactivity disorder. ASD equals autism spectrum disorder. As equals Asperger syndrome. HFA equals high-functioning autism. P equals primary disorder. C equals comorbidity. The children and adolescents were all boys from 6 to 16 years of age and predominantly diagnosed as autistic disorder, autism, with low to high functioning. Other primary. 41. Diagnoses included global developmental delay, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, Down syndrome. Most of the children and adolescents also had moderate to mild intellectual disability, MID. Some children and adolescents who were primarily diagnosed as autism had comorbidities such as ADHD, Asperger syndrome, global developmental delay and epilepsy. All children and adolescents with ASDs who participated in Phase 2 were boys. This is not unusual as it is evident that the majority of individuals with ASDs are male. Elsavig et al. 2012. Table 3.2. Descriptive characteristics of participants in Phase 2. Child gender age disability. 1M6 ADP. 2M7 ADP, GDD, C, AD, C, epilepsy, C, syringomyelia, C. 3M16 ADP. 4M10 ADP, ADHD, C. 5M10 AD, HFAP, as, C, ADHD, C. 6M14 ADP, chromosomal disorder, C. 7M6 ADP, ADHD, C. 8M15 ADP, as, C, ADHD, C. Note. M equals male. AD equals autistic disorder. GDD equals global developmental delay. AD equals attention deficit disorder. ADHD equals attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. As equals Asperger syndrome. HFA equals high functioning autism. P equals primary disorder. C equals comorbidity. Recruitment. Participants were recruited through a special school, which is one catering for students who have special education needs, and a mainstream school with a special unit in Auckland region, and via two service providers, the New Zealand branch of Centre for 42. Autism and Related Disorders and the Wilson Home Trust in Auckland. The invitation to the research was given to potential participants through advertisements and letters. In Phase 1, 2 focus groups and 2 individual interviews were conducted. The number of participants in each focus group was 9 and 4. The first focus group consisted of children or adolescents with ASDs or MID, N equals 2, parents, N equals 4, and special school teachers, N equals 3, whereas the second one included only parents, N equals 4. The individual interviews were undertaken with parents, N equals 2. In Phase 2, 7. Individual interviews with children or adolescents with ASDs, N equals 8, parents, N equals 9. Were conducted. Informed consent. Ethics for this research was approved by AUTEC, reference number 11206. Information sheets were provided to children, see Appendix B for complete proof, and their parents and teachers, see Appendix C for complete proof, and a principal, see Appendix D for complete proof. Access to the school, see Appendix E for complete proof, for a focus group was obtained from the principal. Assent from children, see Appendix B for complete proof. Consent from parents and teachers, see Appendix F for complete proof, and focus group consent, see Appendix G for complete proof, were received prior to study commencement. As children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders and mild intellectual disability are a vulnerable population in terms of their age and severity of disability, consultation with parents and teachers was undertaken prior to the data collection. Where this was the case, researchers gave special consideration to children and adolescents' needs, particularly with respect. Informed consent. Few attempts were made by researchers to give voice to the children and adolescents and to understand their experiences, likes and dislikes, perceptions and actions in their own terms. Morrow and Richards, 1996. 43. Quality of life measure. Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory TM Generic Core Scales Child Self-Report. The original PEDSCAL questionnaire. In Phase 1, the Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory TM 4.0 Generic Core Scales Child Self-Report for young child ages 5 to 7 years, refer to the original PEDSCAL. In this research were utilized. The PEDSCAL questionnaire also involves the other versions of child self-report, including for child ages 8 to 12 years, and for teen ages 13 to 18 years. We, supervisors and myself, identified the PEDSCAL questionnaire as the most appropriate for children and adolescents with ASDs or mid-aged from 5 to 18 years. Because the PEDSCAL questionnaire might be comprehensible for children and adolescents regardless of their cognitive levels. Cremines et al. 2006, Riley, 2004. The PEDSCAL questionnaire consists of total 23 items in 4 distinct dimensions. Physical functioning, 8 items, emotional functioning, 5 items, social functioning, 5 items, and school functioning, 5 items. Barney, Side, and Curtin. 2001. See Appendix H for complete proofs. The PEDSCAL questionnaire contains a 3-point rating scale, not at all, sometimes, and a lot. Barney et al. 2001. The reliability and validity of the PEDSCAL self-reports have been established in children and adolescents with and without chronic and mental health conditions. Coghill et al. 2009. Dankertz et al. 2010, Day et al. 2012, Barney, Burwinkle, Side, and Scar 2003. Among adolescents with high-functioning ASDs, IQ greater than 70, high internal consistency, reliability, low inter-rater agreement, moderate to high construct validity and moderate concurrent validity were established in the PEDSCAL self-reports. Sheldrick et al. 2011. Shipman et al. 2011. Data collection. The purpose of data collection is to discover the what, who, where and why of experiences and perceptions of participants relevant to a specific topic. Sandalowski. 2000. In reflecting on this purpose, the research question, what is an appropriate QOL measurement for children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, was explored through focus group discussions and semi-structured interviews. 45. The researchers allowed time for children to familiarize themselves with the university environment, if the interview was conducted at the university, and the researchers. The interviews began with a brief introduction to explain the research topic and its purpose to the children and their parents. The researchers were consistently assigned to an interviewer, one supervisor, and a note taker, the student. The interviewer led the interview with parents and the children. In phase 2, the interviewer also assisted the children and adolescents, if necessary, while they were answering the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. Although the children and adolescents were supported to complete the whole questionnaire, they were encouraged to have a rest between questions. If the children were not able to understand or were unwilling to answer a question, they skipped the question. The note taker documented the conversation feedback as well as the children's behaviors during the interview. The interviews were audio taped and transcribed by the student, and each transcription and note was doubly checked by the supervisors who conducted the interviews. Open-ended questions in focus groups and interviews. Specific open-ended questions related to the appropriateness of the original and modified PEDSCAL questionnaires were asked to guide the discussion and interview. What did you think about this questionnaire? What aspects of quality of life for the children were missing or not relevant? Which questions were unclear or confusing to the children? Why? What about wording, response scales, format that were used in the questionnaire? For the interviews, however, the emphasis was more on personal aspects of your child, children, for parents, and you, for children and adolescents, to attain detailed behavioral, attitudinal and experiential information. Powell and Single, 1996. In phase 2, questions regarding parental interpretation of the children's behavioral responses to the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire were also sought for the evaluation of the children's experiences. These open-ended questions encourage participants to evaluate the issues of importance to the participants using their own ideas and feelings. Kitzinger, 1995, Kruger and Casey, 2000. The open-ended questions also prompt the participants to generate their own questions and develop the exploration of relevant experiences. Kitzinger, 1995. 46. The flexibility of the open-ended questions could provide a wide range of rich data in relation to the participants' experiences and perceptions of the original and modified PEDSCAL questionnaires. Data analysis. Two strategies of content analysis and thematic analysis were used to analyze the data from transcriptions and notes. The definition and procedure of each technique are described below. Content analysis. Content analysis is a common analysis technique for qualitative description. Niergaard et al. 2009, Sandalowski, 2000. In this research, the purpose of content analysis was 1. To assess the appropriateness of the format, wording and presentation of the PEDSCAL questionnaire in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, and 2. To identify relevant or irrelevant dimensions of the PEDSCAL questionnaire to children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. The data were analyzed according to an inductive content analysis process. Ello and Kingas, 2008. The process involved coding, categorization and summarizing. Ello and Kingas, 2008. Niergaard et al. 2009. Sandalowski, 2000. The student read the data several times and simultaneously wrote down keywords and phrases to understand and become familiar with the content. The keywords and phrases were labeled into each meaning unit, which has been referred to as coding. The list of extracted codes then were grouped together to create subcategories and categories depending on similarities in the extracts. The main categories were defined and described through interpretation of each category. All processes were conducted by the student, and formulated categories and descriptions of each category were double-checked by one of the supervisors (TW) to strengthen integrity and trustworthiness of the findings. Niergaard et al. 2009. Thematic analysis. In order to capture further insight into experiences and perception of the participants, thematic analysis was also conducted. The purpose of thematic analysis in this research 47 was 1. To identify the perception of QOL measurement in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, and 2. To analyze the interpretation of and attitudes towards the PEDSCAL questionnaires in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. Thematic analysis was conducted based on the selective or highlighting approach. Van Manen, 1990. The student first listened to recordings or read documents several times. The statements are phrases that appeared specifically important and to disclose about experience or perception of children and adolescents with ASDs were highlighted or underlined. The similar statements and phases were grouped together. Then, themes and subthemes were discovered and defined through interpreting and seeing the meaning. Elements were identified within the themes and subthemes. The last process was collaboratively conducted with the student and the supervisor (TW), which included examination articulation, reinterpretation, omission, addition or reformulation of the theme span. Monin, 1990, p. 100. The collaborative analysis improved research rigor and determined the credibility and integrity of the findings. Neergaard et al., 2009, Van. Monin, 1990. 48. Chapter 4, Findings and Interpretation. This chapter will present findings of the focus group discussions and individual interviews with children and adolescents, parents and teachers in Phase 1 and 2. This chapter consists of 5 main parts. Firstly, the process of developing the PEDSCAL questionnaire will be described. Secondly, 3 key themes which were discovered through thematic analysis in Phase 1 and 2 will be presented together. According to Van Monin, 1990, theme is the process of insightful invention, discovery or disclosure p. 88, of the data through interpretation, and is not simply conceptual. Formulations are categorical accounts. Therefore, the interpretation of the data to uncover thematic aspects of the experiences and situations will be also introduced with the findings. Thirdly, key categories which were identified through content analysis in Phase 1 and 2 will be presented separately. Since themes embodied the meaning and interpretation of the data, the findings through thematic analysis were broader and deeper than those through content analysis. Consequently, the themes were presented before the categories to capture the significance of the findings. Some findings identified through content analysis were associated with the themes. Lastly, the completion rate and time for completion of the PEDSCAL questionnaire in Phase 2 will be reported. The development of the original PEDSQL questionnaire, the modified PEDSQL questionnaire. The findings from Phase 1 identified that the Pediatric Quality of Life Inventory TM 4.0 child self-report ages 5 to 7 years, i.e. the original PEDSCAL, needed to be modified in order to be used for children and adolescents for ASDs or MID. Through discussions among the 4 researchers, the student and supervisors, several modifications to the original PEDSCAL questionnaire were made, i.e. the modified PEDSCAL. The modification of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire included rewording, changes in response scales and presentation style, and use of visuals. See appendices H and I for complete proofs. The modified PEDSCAL questionnaire was completed by children and adolescents with ASDs in Phase 2. The number of questions which were skipped, i.e. completion rate, and the time for completion of the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire were recorded. 49. Thematic analysis of focus groups and interviews, Phase 1 and 2. 3 themes of concreteness, relationships and perception were identified in relation to the perception of quality of life QOL, measurement in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, and their attitudes toward the PEDSCAL questionnaire, see Table 4.1 and 4.2. The same themes were identified through the analysis of data from Phase 1 and 2, although more subthemes were recognized in the data from Phase 2. Therefore, all data from Phase 1 and 2 are presented and described together based on the themes and subthemes from Phase 2. 50. Table 4.1. Themes from thematic analysis of focus groups and interviews in Phase 1. Theme definition, subtheme definition, examples of quotations. Concreteness, something that is tangible, based on reality of specific events or experience, and is often perceptible through the senses. Whom, a description of a person or people. In the questionnaire, if possible, the use of name of the child, instead of you, when asking the child about their health and activities. Maybe it is better to ask questions about a specific friend rather than in general about friends. When the time or period that something is done or happens in a particular situation. Specifying a certain time or a certain day, such as Monday, or today. Asking the children to think about the questions in terms of the past month would be a challenge. Lately, or past week, would be better. Where a particular place or part that is likely to be known by the child, or a variety of interpretations of context. It's better to use wide contexts, rather than time. Such as, at school, or, at home. The question of, I worry about what will happen to you, where and when. 51. What particular information or details about the thing or things. It may be useful to separate classwork from homework, in terms of keeping up with schoolwork, without particular reference to a specific sporting activity or exercise that the children like or try to participate in. It may not make sense. Relationships, a particular type of connection between individuals in the context of social, cultural and other influences, which varies from family or kinship relations. friendship or peer relationships to relations with neighborhoods, social interactions, the process of communication between two or more individuals and one or more types of behaviors in the context of an individual's family, friends or peers. The children want to make friends, but at the same time they feel overwhelmed. The children cope better with adults. Self, an individual person as the object of his or her own reflective consciousness in the state of not interacting with others. Questions on social functioning such as getting along with other children are not relevant for low functioning children with autism because they don't want to play. The children actually prefer to play alone and don't necessarily want or desire the participation and interaction with other children. Perception, the way we interpret or make sense of sensory input which is attained via five senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste and touch. Visuals, pictures that are illustrated in the questionnaire to make the meaning of each question clearer. Possibly the use of visual images may also be helpful. Using pictures from their world ideally to supplement questions. The use of visuals would likely contribute to a better understanding of the questions by the children. 52. It directly influences or controls thoughts, feelings, behaviors, or a combination of these. Feelings, a child's emotions that are aware through the mind and the senses, or emotional expressions that are demonstrated as pictures. The use of happy face or sad face symbols for the questions around feelings. Use visuals together with emotions such as smiley faces would be more easily understood. Use of emotive language may be difficult for some children to understand. 53. Theme 1. Concreteness. Concreteness is defined as something that is tangible, based on reality of specific events or experience and is often perceptible through the senses. Hobson, 2012, Rosa Catricala, Biglioco, and Kappa, 2010. This is in contrast to abstract, which refers to something that cannot be perceived directly in the senses. Rosa et al., 2010. Being concrete implies that concepts become more perceivable, more imaginable, or easier to contextualize. Rosa et al., 2010, and it avoids issues of vagueness, ambiguity, or generalization. Moving from concrete to abstract thinking is one of the milestones of normal childhood development. According to Piaget's cognitive developmental theory, children about age 7 to 11 are at the concrete operational stage, Schaefer and Kipp 2007a. In this stage, children rapidly acquire cognitive operations and apply these important new skills when thinking about objects and events that they have experienced. Schaefer and Kipp 2007a. A cognitive operation is an internal mental activity that enables children to modify and reorganize their images and symbols to reach a logical conclusion. Schaefer and Kipp 2007a. When children turn 12 to 13 years of age, they start to think abstractly. That represents the attainment of formal operational thinking. White, Hayes, and Livesey, 2010d. This increased ability of abstract thinking allows the children to consider alternative ways of organizing the world and to think more deeply about abstract concepts such as truth, justice, freedom and morality. White et al., 2010d. This cognitive transition from concrete to formal operational thinking, however, is not likely to occur properly in children with ASDs. Consequently, they have difficulty dealing with abstract concepts. Children with ASDs often demonstrate impairment in verbal and nonverbal communication, which are associated with cognitive and language malfunctioning. Philippic et al., 1999, Hobson, 2012. Atypical patterns of cognitive processing such as concrete and abstract thinking in children with autism are probably due to neurological abnormalities. Grandin, 2000, Quill, 1995. Individuals with ASDs are limited in their ability to think abstractly, in which the process of interpretation is required. Church, Alasansky, and Aminola, 2000, Hobson, 2012, Ropar and Peebles, 2007. Instead, they pay more attention to concrete characteristics of stimulus. Hobson, 2012, Ropar and Peebles, 2007. Children with high-functioning autism and Asperger syndrome. 4. 54. Example, find concrete words or factual knowledge easier to read than abstract words. Church et al., 2000, Ropar and Peebles, 2007. Differences in the way children and adolescents with ASDs think concretely can become problematic when they deal with questions or questionnaires that involve abstract concepts. Hobson, 2012, describes how individuals with autism have difficulty with forming a fixed and categorical frame of reference that transcends the immediate. Context of their experience. For typically developing children around the age of 12 years, abstract thinking is a developmental landmark, White et al. 2010d. However, the present study revealed that not only the participants aged younger than 12 years but also the older participants were confused by and could not comprehend general and conceptual ideas. In this respect, it is critical to identify abstract concepts in the original PEDSCEL questionnaire and determine what is concrete for children and adolescents with ASDs in the different contexts of each question. Questions about social functioning in both PEDSCEL questionnaires that focused on social interaction or relationships used abstract terminology of who, whom such as you, and other kids. The definition of who, whom refers to a description of a person or people in the questionnaire. The abstract concept of who, whom was difficult for the children and adolescents with ASDs to comprehend as it introduced people in a general rather than specific way. In response to this, parents from phase 1 and 2 of the focus groups and interviews talked about using the names of the child with ASDs instead of you and other kids. An example of this was Jack likes to play with William and Liam. Another difficulty for children and adolescents with ASDs was orientating to the general idea of when. When is used to describe the time or period that something is done or happens in a particular situation. However, when is asked as a question, it is an inquiry into a more general point in time or a period of time, such as the past 1 month, or the last few weeks. It was hard for the children and adolescents with ASDs to generalize about their answers over the period of time. Bell 2007 also indicated that short recall periods are more suitable for children due to their limited memory capacity. Parents from phase 1 of the interviews suggested that it might be possible for children with autism to respond a question if the period is more specified at a point of time, such 55 as yesterday. In addition, the concept of yesterday needs to be connected to a specific day because the children found it difficult to grasp the idea of yesterday. For example, the concept of yesterday was explained as yesterday was Tuesday before the children answered the questionnaire. Regarding questions about school functioning, however, the idea of yesterday was modified if a child and an adolescent did not have school yesterday. In this case, a certain day in the past will be provided to remind the child and adolescent of his school days, for instance, on Friday. Children and adolescents with autism also tend to consider specificity of time in a day. On the second question in school functioning of the modified PEDSCEL questionnaire, an adolescent with autism and his mother from phase 2 of the interview had conversation of whether he was sick in bed or not. The adolescent maintained that he was sick in bed yesterday. The mother asked him, "When were you sick, at night time or during the day?" He answered, "I was sick at night time." This result highlighted the importance of specification of when. The question needs to be described with a particular time frame such as daytime or nighttime in order to obtain an accurate response from the child. The information of where also helps children and adolescents with ASDs to visualize a situation that they have experienced. Where refers to a particular place or part that is likely to be known by the child or adolescent. Where also encompasses a variety of interpretations of context, for example, where it is identifying where in each question allows children and adolescents with ASDs to understand the meaning of the questions and smoothly link each question to their memories. In response to this comment from phase 1 of the focus group, all questions about school functioning were modified with the information of where, which is either at school or at home. A parent commented on question 7 of the physical functioning domain of the modified PEDSCEL questionnaire that it might be appropriate to ask a child a further question such as where he, she hurt. If the child answered a lot or sometimes, use of the general term of body in this question may result in guessing an answer instead of judging it from their experience. 56. As regards the second question in school functioning of the modified PEDSCEL questionnaire, a parent asked an adolescent to ensure that he actually meant that he had felt sick. Where are you sick or sore? The parent explained later that he sometimes had a headache, which is not necessarily categorized as traditional sickness, but he might answer, he was sick. Again, the word of sick may be misinterpreted by the children and adolescents with ASDs or mid. Clearly highlighting where or which part in a question and even its answer may allow children and adolescents with ASDs to interpret the question correctly and to obtain the Answer which are inferred from circumstances of their life. General terms of physical activities such as sports and exercise, used in the third question in physical functioning of the original PED-scale questionnaire were hardly understood by children and adolescents with ASDs. It is necessary when working with children and adolescents with ASDs to explicate what kind of activities each question indicates. The notion of what implies particular information or details about the thing or things. In phase 1 of the interviews, one parent suggested that it may not make sense to the children if there is no particular reference to a specific sporting activity or exercise that children with ASDs like or try to participate in. In question 6 in physical functioning domain of the modified PED-scale questionnaire, another ambiguous phrase, to help in the house, was often highlighted in phase 2 of the interviews. One child was not able to understand the meaning of this question. 3 parents from phase 2 of the interviews provided an example of their children's chores at home such as mopping, vacuuming, and tidying up a room, when the question was read out. These results show that specific activities for each child need to be identified through their parents or caregivers before the questionnaire is conducted. Considering these consistent findings, the description of concrete contents and contexts in a questionnaire may be critical for children and adolescents with ASDs. The concept of concreteness indicates that one circumstance cannot be converted into others. When context of each question is precisely set by specific information of person, time and place, the questionnaire may provide only a snapshot of a child's or an adolescent's 57. QOL instead of the present QOL in general. It is possible that a child or an adolescent may answer the same questionnaire differently depending on the situation where he or she is at this moment. It was often reported that children and adolescents with ASDs had a weekly routine. It means asking questions about a point of time such as yesterday may cause a wide diversity of answers over a period of time. In addition, a questionnaire which is tailored for a child or an adolescent with ASDs may not be appropriate for the other children or adolescents. It means that it will be difficult to create a general questionnaire among children and adolescents with ASDs, and variability will exist within the questionnaire. 58. Table 4.2. Themes from thematic analysis of interviews in phase 2. Theme definition, subtheme definition, element, examples of quotations. Concreteness, something that is tangible, based on reality, of specific events or experience, and is often perceptible through the senses. Whom, a description of a person or people in the questionnaire. Do you like to play with the child's friend's name listed? When the time or period that something is done or happens in a particular situation. Yesterday was Tuesday. At night time or during the day. Where a particular place or part that is likely to be known by the child, or a variety of interpretations of context. Where were you sick? At home. Where were you sick in your tummy or head or arm? Where were you sick? What particular information or details about the thing or things? Is it easy for you to tidy up, or is it easy for you to make your own bed? Is it easy? Like tidy up, I, the parent, D, make them, the children, vacuum and mop. 59. Relationships, a particular type of connection between individuals in the context of social, cultural, and other influences, which varies from family or kinship relations, friendship or peer relationships to relations with neighborhoods, social interactions, the process of communication between two or more individuals and one or more types of behaviors in the context of an individual's family, friends, or peers. Friends, I, the parent, just think it's difficult all of that area, so trying to get kids to play with friends and the whole thing. He, the child, doesn't need a friend around. Family, socially the children's brothers are totally different from other kids. The most important thing in the child's life is his family. We spend a lot of time with extended family. He, the older brother, found me, the child, as a big embarrassment to him. Adults, the children's ability to have relationships with adults and teachers, and I, the parent, think it's really, really important. They, the children, are much more comfortable talking to adults than they are with, their peers. Community, I, the parent, am actually looking into building community. That's for the child. I, the parent, think it is quite important, because if I want them, the children, to be eventually something that happens in the community. 60. Self, an individual person as the object of his or her own reflective consciousness, and the state of not interacting with others. I, the child, just don't usually hang out with people. I just hang by myself. I, the parent, guess it could be tailored to the individual activities that the child likes doing. Perception, the way we interpret or make sense of sensory input, which is attained via 5 senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. It directly influences or controls thoughts, feelings, behaviors, or a combination of visuals, pictures that are illustrated in the questionnaire to make the meaning of each question clearer. Picture expression is very good. He, the child, gets it quite quickly. Obviously, kids with autism are very visual, so yeah, pictures are good too because they are so simple. Pictures are definitely feelings, a child's emotions that are aware through the mind and the senses, or emotional expressions that are demonstrated as pictures. Facial expression. He, the child, quite likes TV, but he only watches for a very short period of time. So I don't think he'd feel sad if we go for a walk instead watching TV. Mental states. Some people with what I, the child, have could be more the unexpected. Some might have bad temper. Some might be a little distractive. And some can just have real bad meltdowns. I, the parent, am not sure that's necessarily how he, the child, is, because one of them he said he was angry and sad, and next one he was very happy, so I don't know that is that. 61. These behavior a particular way that the child answers the questionnaire. Repetition. He, the child, is still gonna say happy because what he has been doing, it's about a routine and a pattern that is responded to. What I, the parent, am just saying was that to avoid that, repetition and just answering the same thing. Preference. He, the child, chose a lot, but he would probably choosing a smiley face. If you got yes or no, he, the child, would always probably do yes, I, the parent, think. Most of the time he, the child, answers yes for everything anyway. 62. Theme 2. Relationships. A relationship refers to a particular type of connection between individuals in the context of social, cultural, and other influences, which varies from family or kinship relations, friendship or peer relationships to relations with neighborhoods. Relationships encompass aggregations of interactions between two individuals. Hint, 1976, 1995, Rubin, Bukowski, and Lausen, 2011. Characteristics of a relationship are determined by the content, quality, and pattern of interactions, the extent to which the interactions are reciprocal or complementary, and the level of cognitive and moral abilities. Hint, 1976, 1995. The level of cognitive, emotional, moral, and personality development is strongly associated with that of social development. White, Hayes, and Livesey, 2010c. The degree of social achievement in early childhood, including attachment, play, self-esteem, and social relationships, influences the development of socialization and social competence in later life. White et al. 2010c. Compared to typically developing children, children with ASDs have certain impairments in perceiving, producing, and understanding emotions, and verbal and nonverbal communication. Philippic et al. 1999, Travis, 1998. These impairments create obstacles to successfully engaging in social interactions and maintaining relationships. Travis, 1998. In the study by Church and Copland, 1995, parents of preteens with high-functioning autism reported that their children often had awkward peer relationships or friendships with younger children. One child described that he was able to sustain relationships with his peers if interactions were anticipated. However, if something was changed, the child got confused and would go into his long monologues. Church and Copland, 1995. Adolescents with Asperger syndrome are often unable to make reciprocal social interactions and tend to be seen as self-centered with a deficit of understanding of others. Carrington, Templeton, and Popinchak, 2003. Individuals with Asperger syndrome find it hard to interpret implicit social cues such as nonverbal body language. Carrington et al. 2003. It is evident that the ability of initiating, sustaining, or maintaining relationships among children and adolescents with ASDs is highly variable but still problematic. These findings were consistent with the results from the present study. 63. Under the theme of relationships, two subthemes were identified: social interactions and self. Social interactions refer to the process of communication between two or more individuals and one or more types of behaviors in the context of an individual's family, friends, or peers. All 5 questions about social functioning in both PEDSCAL questionnaires involved social interactions with friends. However, other 3 essential interactions for children and adolescents with ASDs were also identified in this study: family, adults, and community. In response to the questions about social functioning, especially regarding social interactions with friends, one parent of an adolescent with autism from Phase 2 explained one of the reasons for not interacting with friends. Teenagers are, there are so many rules about being teenagers. That is impossible to interact with them. Two parents from Phase 1 and 2 of the interviews reported that the child and adolescent did not need friends around him. Another parent from Phase 1 of the interview explained that the child interacted with his classmates, which was reported by the child as a lot but by the parent as sometimes. The parent explained that he did not realize that he did not socialize well. It is apparent that interactions with friends or classmates are difficult for children and adolescents with ASDs. Interactions with family, including parents, siblings, and extended family, are important elements for children and adolescents with ASDs. In Phase 2 of the interview, one parent reported on interactions with a brother of the child with autism. The older brother makes a point of engaging them and he comes up with play, and they readily interact with him. I think the harder part for the kids with spectrum is other people, not their own family. Another parent from Phase 2 of the interview described, the most important thing in his life is his family. We spend a lot of time with our extended family. So I did think that there's actually nothing in the questionnaire about family. 64 children and adolescents with ASDs feel more comfortable to communicate and more likely to establish relationships with adults such as teachers and teacher aides than with peers. Parents from Phase 1 and 2 of the interviews pointed out the importance of having relationships with teachers or teachers' aides since adolescents with ASDs have difficulty and a lack in getting along with their peers. Complex changes in the structure of peer relationships from childhood to adolescence may hinder adolescents with ASDs from interacting with peers. Community interactions are a more future target for children and adolescents with ASDs in later life. In Phase 2 of the interview, one parent of a primary school child with autism described that they were looking into building community for the child and identifying the neighbors who could support him. Another parent from Phase 2 of the interview also described identifying the persons with whom the children play sports or do any physical activities as important, as the children would eventually join something that happens in the community. The findings showed that the key social interactions in QOL of children and adolescents with ASDs were taking place rarely with friends or peers, more often with family and adults, and later in the community. Although questions about social functioning in both PEDSCAL questionnaires mainly focus on relationships with friends, children and adolescents with ASDs have difficulty with interacting with peers and are more often by themselves. Self refers to an individual person as the object of his or her own reflective consciousness and the state of not interacting with others. Children and adolescents with ASDs preferred to be alone and do their own individual activities. One adolescent with Asperger syndrome commented, "I just don't usually hang out with people. Just by myself, go for walk, do my own thing. I'm not so interested in hanging out with them." When he talked about being by himself in his spare time, he also described it as, "I just say I have my moment. Usually at home I have my special moment." One parent from Phase 2 of the interview suggested that individual activities that the child likes doing are crucial for his QOL. Another parent from Phase 2 of the interview reported that the adolescent was usually watching DVDs or playing sports. 65 Otherwise there is nothing to do. Though playing sports in general is an opportunity to socialize with others, children and adolescents with ASDs are unlikely to socialize through sports. Nevertheless, they are still able to play individual and team sports without having socialized well. For children and adolescents with ASDs, doing or participating in sports and socializing through sports are not synonymous. These results revealed that self-activities or activities in their own time are important aspects of their QOL. However, there are no questions regarding the individual activities in either PEDSCAL questionnaire. It is evident that for children and adolescents with ASDs, building relationships and having social interactions are challenging parts of their life. They prefer to be by themselves and do their own things. However, socialization is still a goal for their QOL. One adolescent with Asperger syndrome commented, "I'm trying to start social life but so far, I think it's not working." Parents also try to make opportunities for their children to socialize with others, such as through participating in sports. There may be a gap between the parental goal of fostering children's and adolescents' relationships and how the children and adolescents have actually perceived or experienced social interactions. Considering the concept of social relationships in children and adolescents with ASDs is different from that in typically developing children and adolescents, the PEDSCAL questionnaire need to embrace aspects of social interactions with not only friends or peers but family and adults, including teachers and teacher aides. It is also necessary to recognize the importance of children's and adolescents' own time and activities. Theme 3, Perception. Perception, including recognition and identification, refers to the way we interpret or make sense of sensory input which is attained via 5 senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste and touch. Schaefer and Kipp 2007b, White, Hayes, and Livesey 2010b. It also directly influences or controls thoughts, feelings, behaviors or a combination of these. Perception is obtained and progressed through interaction between inborn perceptual abilities and a child's experiences in the environment. White et al. 2010b. By the age of 6 years, typically developing children have begun to have depth 66 perception, and have attained an ability to recognize colors and different facial expressions. White et al. 2010b. However, it is evident that sensory peculiarities are considered as integral features of autism and consequently affect the development of the perceptual system in individuals with autism. Urachi and McDonald 2006. Individuals with autism have reported difficulties in their subjective sensory perceptual experience, particularly in the reception, input, and processing, interpret, of sensory information. Urachi and McDonald 2006. Children with Asperger syndrome also have a noteworthy impairment in ability to integrate sensory information and demonstrate atypical and unique behaviors. Church et al. 2000. It is evident that perceptual peculiarities and consequent emotional and behavioral abnormalities are core symptoms in individuals with ASDs. The development of perception progresses through fundamental abilities to selectively attend to, and spatially and temporally integrate multiple sensory information from different modalities. Urachi and McDonald 2006. Atypical perception in individuals with autism has effects on the integration of multiple sensory inputs. Urachi and McDonald 2006. The perceptual experience of individuals with autism demonstrated that visual perception is likely to predominate in the integrated audiovisual sensory contexts. Urachi and McDonald 2006. Grandin 2000, who was diagnosed with autism, reported that her perceptual and thinking process carries on in pictures rather than in language and words. In the study of cerebral processing on an embedded figures task, individuals with autism used more visual parts of the brain rather than memory systems, which typically developing individuals mainly used. Ring et al. 1999. Individuals with ASDs also have impairments in the cognitive processing of emotions, including problems in identifying and describing feelings, and difficulties in recognizing feelings from the physical sensations of emotional arousal. Hill, Brathoz, and Frith 2004. Children with autism at all ages and ability levels have abnormalities in characteristics of emotional expression and emotional recognition. Travis, 1998. Compared to adolescents with ASDs, however, younger children with ASDs struggled for recognizing basic facial expressions and understanding complex emotions. Stichter, O'Connor, Herzog, Leierheimer, and McGee, 2012. Rutherford and McIntosh 2007, reported that individuals with autism have a different process of recognizing facial expressions, which tend to focus on discrete facial features rather than the configuration 67 of a combination of features. Behaviors of individuals with ASDs tend to be inflexible and follow a certain pattern or routines with specific details. Church et al. 2000, Ozonif, Pennington, and Rogers, 1991. Many children with ASDs are more likely to have a particular interest or activity, and repetitively engage in a fixed type of behavior. Church et al. 2000, Ozonif et al. 1991. In Phase 1 of focus groups and interviews, all parents consistently reported that the use of visuals is helpful for children and adolescents with ASDs to understand the meaning of each question. Visuals refer to pictures that are illustrated in the questionnaire to make the meaning of each question clearer. One parent from Phase 2 of the interview reported the use of visual images might be helpful for children with ASDs in any level of reading ability. Another parent interviewed in from Phase 2 described that the use of visuals would possibly contribute to better understanding of the questions by the children. In response to this feedback, the original PEDSCAL questionnaire was modified and illustrated with pictures in each question. The modified PEDSCAL questionnaire, see Appendices H and I for complete proofs. In Phase 2 of interviews using the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire, 5 out of 6 parents and 1 adolescent provided positive comments on the visuals in the questionnaire. One parent described picture expression as very good. He gets it quite quickly. I think the pictures help him to answer the question faster, but the fact is that he can read. Another parent mentioned, pictures are really help. The idea of visuals is of course to have less word and let the pictures do the talking. Other comments on the visuals such as simple, not distractive, and get the child's attention were reported. These remarks demonstrate that the use of visuals in the questionnaire is beneficial for children and adolescents with ASDs in terms of comprehension of the meaning of each question. The PEDSCAL self-reports for children and adolescents are based on personal appraisal of their well-being on the domain of physical, emotional, social and school functioning. 68 for children and adolescents with ASDs, however, it is hard to recognize or reflect on their own feelings irrelevant to each question. Feelings refer to a child's or an adolescent's emotions that are aware through the mind, mental state, and the senses, or emotional expressions such as facial expressions that are demonstrated as pictures. Both of the original and modified PEDSCAL questionnaires include 3-point response scale with facial expressions. In the original PEDSCAL questionnaire, the construction of each item is based on assessment of difficulties such as, how much of a problem, and the responses of not at all, sometimes, and a lot corresponded to smiley, neutral, and sad faces, respectively. The contrary between negative statements and positive responses might confuse children and adolescents with ASDs to answer questions. It is recommended that negative formulations should be avoided in a questionnaire for children. Bell, 2007. Therefore, in the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire, some questions were reworded from negative to positive wording such as easy, instead of hard, to highlight positive aspects of life and happiness. The responses of each question were also switched to match them to relevant facial expressions. For example, not at all was represented with smiley face. One parent from phase 1 of the interview reported that use of smiley faces would be more easily understood for children with ASDs. On the contrary, one parent from phase 2 of the interviews pointed out that facial expressions were quite confusing because they sometimes did not correspond to the child's own feelings. In the warm-up question of how much TV did name of the child watch yesterday, the child would not feel sad if he could go for a walk instead of watching TV. It is possible that the use of facial expressions in the response options may cause confusion in terms of disagreement between a child's own feelings and corresponding facial expressions. The nature of mental states in children and adolescents with ASDs is different from that in typically developing children and adolescents. In the study by Church et al. 2000, parents of middle school children with Asperger syndrome reported that their children were emotionally more unstable than typically developing peers. In the present study, the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire included 4 questions on mental states, namely feelings of fear, sadness, anger and happiness. It is evident that the mood of children and adolescents with ASDs fluctuates considerably in a day. One parent from phase 2 of the interview doubted why the child answered that he felt angry, sad, scared and 69 happy in a day. This enquiry can be resolved by another adolescent's description of his own emotions. The adolescent with Asperger syndrome from phase 2 of the interview reported that he had random mood swings in which he first feels happy and it changed to pain and misery in a moment. In addition, another parent described that the length of each emotion that a child felt was varied. Feelings of fear, anger and upset tended to be instant, but feelings of happiness and sadness were more likely to last longer. There may be difficulty in capturing the general characteristics of mental states in children and adolescents with ASDs. Children and adolescents with ASDs are characterized by atypical behavioral traits, which affect their responses to the QOL questionnaire. Behavior refers to a particular way that the child or adolescent answers the questionnaire. 2 peculiar behaviors of repetition and preference, which are typical features of ASDs, were observed and reported throughout phase 2 of the interviews. One pair of parents described, he's got a routine of clicking a happy box because that just it becomes a habit. It's about a routine and a pattern that is responded to. In response to this feedback, the order of the response scales was slightly altered in every question. After a couple of trials of this version, one of the parents commented, "Do you change these orders around, don't you? Actually, it's a good point. He, the child, would do that, choose the same answer." Furthermore, children and adolescents with ASDs tend to prefer positive to negative responses, such as, a lot rather than, not at all, smiley face, rather than, sad face, or, yes, rather than, no. 2 parents from phase 2 of the interviews reported that the child always answered, yes, for everything. The parent also mentioned the child liked to choose, a lot, and, smiley face. These findings demonstrate that the presentation of the questions needs to be considered to avoid repetitive behaviors and preference but to internalize the children and adolescents with ASDs to respond each question. Children and adolescents with ASDs have unique perception, which impacts on their feelings and behaviors. Predominant visual dependence, impairs in emotional 70 recognition and atypical behaviors were issues of conducting the QOL questionnaire in children and adolescents with ASDs. The use of visuals in each item may cause misinterpretation of the questions because the children and adolescents may not be familiar with the pictures or the pictures may not represent their real situation. Children and adolescents with ASDs may take questions as a task of matching facial expressions in the response scales to the pictures in the question, and they do not reflect their own feelings. Likewise, behaviors of repetition and preference in children and adolescents with ASDs may result in their habitually choosing the same option. Therefore, the presentation and administration of each question for children and adolescents with ASDs are important components of getting the children engaged in the questionnaire, and helping the children and adolescents understand the questions and reflect their thoughts. Content analysis of focus groups and interviews. Phase 1. The appropriateness of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID was examined in Phase 1. 5 categories of rewording, responses, presentation, irrelevance and omission were identified. See Table 4.3. Rewording refers to the wording in the original PEDSCAL that need to be changed into different words or phrases or even a new sentence. Parents reported that children and adolescents with ASDs might face a difficulty in understanding a word or phrase which has multiple meanings such as hard. In particular, autistic children with low cognitive functioning tend to interpret the meaning of each word literally. For instance, the word of hard might be perceived as something that is difficult to bend or break, instead of difficult to do, understand or answer. This hallmark of literal thinking, in other words, concrete thinking which is related to the theme of concreteness, would be a major obstacle to comprehending metaphorical terms in the original PEDSCAL questionnaire. Therefore, it is suitable for children and adolescents with ASDs to use a simple statement with a lucid account. A response refers to an answer to a question in which options such as dichotomous or rating scales are included. The young child version of the original PEDSCAL has 3 Likert scales of not at all, sometimes, and a lot, and the child report has 5.71 Likert scales of never, almost never, sometimes, often, and almost always. One parent described that a 5-point scale was too varied and too difficult to select one of them. Other parents suggested that yes/no question, such as do you or can you, would be more reasonable for children and adolescents with ASDs. All questions in the original PEDSCAL questionnaire arrange response scales in the same place, that is, not at all, in the left side, sometimes, in the middle, and a lot, in the right side. Children and adolescents with ASDs have a typical repetitive behavior of making a routine or habit, which may influence their selection of a response scale. Parents reported that the order of the response scales needed to be altered in order not to simply select the same scale. Not only the order of the response scales but the presentation of the questionnaire or questions was also an important factor. Presentation refers to the way in which the questionnaire or each question is shown or described to the children. The original PEDSCAL questionnaire is a 1-page paper and pencil questionnaire questions in which 23 questions are listed consecutively. 2 parents pointed out that it is preferable for children and adolescents with ASDs to present one question at a time. In addition, a parent recommended that a question be showed as a declarative rather than interrogative sentence. The original PEDSCAL questionnaire was designed for children and adolescents with and without acute and chronic health conditions, but not specifically for children and adolescents with ASDs. The findings demonstrated that there were unrelated or missing aspects of their QOL in the original PEDSCAL. Irrelevance refers to a question that is not important to or associated with the child and adolescent. Most of the questions in the domain of social functioning were regarded as irrelevant to the children and adolescents with ASDs. In particular, children and adolescents with low-functioning autism and some with Asperger syndrome were unlikely to socially interact with their friends. Omission refers to elements that are important to the child's or adolescent's QOL but are not included in the questionnaire. One parent highlighted that the significance of sense of belonging in the child's life was not included in the original PEDSCAL. A general impression of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire were favorable, such as straightforward, relatively easy, not too long, and good for New Zealand kids. However, there were still pitfalls that children and adolescents with ASDs were able to 72 complete the self-report of the original PEDSCAL, referring to a child's comment of a little hard. 73 Table 4.3 Categories from content analysis of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire. Category definition. Subcategory examples of quotations. Rewording. The wording in the original PEDSCAL that need to be changed into different words or phrases or even a new sentence. Physical functioning. Use of the word hard could be difficult for some children to understand. Emotional functioning. Angry instead of mad. Trouble may be a difficult word to understand in the context of sleeping. Social functioning, get along with, would be perhaps changed to be friends with. The word of tease would be changed to friendly, or unfriendly, perhaps. The children might struggle with keep up. School functioning, it may be useful to separate classwork from homework, in terms of keeping up with schoolwork. 74 responses in answer to a question in which options such as dichotomous or rating scales are included. Yes, no, hard for you, would be changed to can you. The question, is it hard for you, could be reworded to do you. Rating scale, a 5-point scale would be too hard and too many. Order, mixing up the smiley face answers between questions so there is less risk of the children simply selecting the same face as an answer. Need to mix things up so that the smiley is not always on the left. Presentation, the way in which the questionnaire or each question is shown or described to the children one by one question at a time, present questions as individual questions. Declarative sentence, presenting questions as sentences, for example, name, is happy when she runs. Irrelevance, a question that is not important to or associated with the child's social functioning. These questions are not relevant for low-functioning children with autism because they don't want to play. However, children with Asperger's want to have friends. School functioning, are they supposed to remember things? About the question of do you forget things? 75 omission, elements that are important to the child's quality of life but are not included in the questionnaire. Social functioning, if a questionnaire were to be designed from scratch, it would have a question about sense of belonging. 76 content analysis of interviews, Phase 2. In Phase 2, the appropriateness of the modified PED-scale questionnaire in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID was examined. Each question in the modified PED-scale questionnaire included pictures and was presented one by one in a page. 4 categories of rewording, responses, irrelevance and omission were recognized. See Table 4.4. Rewording refers to the wording in the modified PED-scale that need to be changed into different words or phrases or even a new sentence. A phrase of question 6 in physical functioning, to help in the house, was rephrased by most parents to something like to tidy up, or to mop and vacuum. A parent explained that this phrase was too abstract for the children and adolescents to understand it. The word of friendly was also ambiguous according to one parent. Instead of asking children and adolescents with ASDs, how other kids behaved to you, it is understandable to ask them what other kids did with you, such as talking, or playing. Again, concrete concepts and description are necessary for children and adolescents with ASDs. A response refers to an answer to a question in which options such as dichotomous or rating scales are included. Response options in the modified PED-scale, which consisted of 3-point Likert scales with 3 distinct facial expressions, namely smiley, neutral and sad faces, were presented below each item and picture. In response to the first interview with parents, the description of each scale was adjusted depending on the nature of the questions, such as very easy, sometimes easy, and not easy. The order of response scales was also slightly changed in every question. The format of the modified PED-scale questionnaire was firmly established after the second interview in order to obtain consistent ideas of further revisions of the questionnaire. In agreement with the findings in Phase 1, 2 parents reported, yes-no question is more suitable for children and adolescents with ASDs. On the other hand, one parent pointed out that there were no alternative options such as not applicable and do not know, which are usually included in a survey. In Phase 2, irrelevant and missing facets of the modified PED-scale were clearly demonstrated. Irrelevance refers to a question that is not important to or associated with the child, and omission stands for elements that are important to the child's or. 77 adolescents QOL but are not included in the questionnaire. Most children and adolescents in the interviews went to special schools, and a few studied at mainstream schools. The majority of parents agreed that the children usually do not receive homework. Compared to the findings from Phase 1, more views on unique characteristics of social interactions in children and adolescents with ASDs were attained. As consistent with the findings of the theme of relationships, irrelevant aspects of the modified PED-scale questionnaire were interactions with peers and friends, while questions about interactions with family and adults, particularly teachers and teachers' aides who are important persons for the child's life, were left out. Clarifying the type of individual activities and the level of activity and engagement were also viewed as a critical component of QOL in children and adolescents with ASDs in terms of social and physical perspectives. 78 Table 4.4 Categories from Content Analysis of the Modified PEDSCAL Questionnaire Category Definition Subcategory Examples of quotations Rewording the wording in the Modified PEDSCAL that need to be changed into different words or phrases or even a new sentence Physical functioning The phrase of to help in the house was rephrased to tidy up, to make your own bed, or to mop and vacuum, by parents. Social functioning, I, the parent, always say, who did he, the child, talk to today, because with us it's all around talking anyway and other kids will talk to him. The word of friendly, was changed to, nice by a parent. School functioning, I, the parent, think, what you learned at school, rather than, was taught. 79 Responses An answer to a question in which options such as dichotomous or rating scales are included yes no, the three categories is actually quite hard. Probably it would be easy, yes, or, no, and I, the parent, would think he, the child, would get that right too. This is more, yes no, question. Varied options, the same answers for every question. It's easier but it doesn't mean that the children actually interpreting the question. I, the parent, noticed that the different section obviously scale is the same, right? But it varies, right? Depending on the section, I think, differs some, right? Alternative options Another option such as, not applicable, cannot answer, do not want to answer, do not know, or, maybe, were suggested by parents. Order, I, the parent, think you changed the order of these all the time, didn't you? Definitely. It is better to swap the orders around. Can you change these order around, don't you? Actually it's a good point. Irrelevance A question that is not important to or associated with the child's school functioning, it's too stressful but well that's what they suggest is don't try and do homework with kids on the spectrum, it's all, the day is over, forget it, just have some downtime. He, the child, doesn't have homework. There is no schoolwork at home. 80 Omission elements that are important to the child's quality of life but are not included in the questionnaire Social functioning, what about interaction with adults in his world, teachers or other caregivers such an important persons in the child's life? Content of interaction with others such as adults, teachers or teacher aides. I, the parent, don't think that there's actually nothing in there about family. I, the parent, think if you do something on family as well like do you have brothers or sisters? And do you play sports with your family? Activity, I, the parent, guess you could tailor it to the individual activities that the child likes doing. It should include, how many times to identify the level of activity and to ascertain how often the child is actually doing it. Probably something like, what do you do in your spare time? To make things a bit more interesting. 81 In Phase 2, completion rate and time for completion of the modified PEDSCAL were also measured, see Table 4.5. Except for one adolescent who had low-functioning ASDs and was not able to answer the questionnaire, 7 children and adolescents completed the questionnaire without omitting any of the questions. Mean and standard deviation of time for completion were 10.78 plus or minus 7.18, ranged 4.87 to 21.35 minutes. Throughout Phase 2 of the interviews, enthusiastic impression and high satisfaction of the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire were obtained such as pretty good, straightforward, just perfect, and better than the original questionnaire. Parents reported that the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire provided them with a new viewpoint on their children and adolescents. One parent commented, the first time I think for the child to complete a questionnaire, the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire gave me every information of the child as well. That is good. Another parent remarked, I was quite surprised that he, the child, could make time for what he likes and come and do this, the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. The modified PEDSCAL questionnaire also fascinated parents to know their children's and adolescents' answers regarding QOL of the children and adolescents, and to see how the children and adolescents internalized themselves. It was also reported that consultation with parents to tailor the questionnaire to each child and adolescent would be essential. However, the presence of parents and their observation of the children and adolescents may prevent from reflecting the children's and adolescents' own perspectives, due to the fact that parents assisted the children and adolescents in suggesting answers which are more likely to be proxy reports. This issue would be a major obstacle in terms of self-reported quality of life. 82 Table 4.5 Completion rate and time for completion of the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. Child age completion rate. Time for completion, percent, minute, 1, 6, 121.002, 7, 121.353, 16, 106, 37, 4, 10, 106, 55, 5, 10, 100, 06.926, 14, not applicable. A 7, 6, 108.428, 15, 104.87. Note, the children had low functioning ASDs. Overall, the perception of QOL in children and adolescents with ASDs are mid and their characters were different from those in typically developing children and adolescents. Specifically, deficits in social interactions and relationships, unique perceptions, and cognitive disability significantly impact on their QOL, which, in turn, affect their interpretation of and attitudes towards the original PEDSCAL questionnaire. The wording, format and presentation of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire were less appropriate for children with ASDs or MID, and we recognized the need for developing the original PEDSCAL questionnaire. The modification of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire included rewording from abstract to concrete accounts, using visuals, changing the order of response scales, and presenting individual question at a time. Although positive feedback from parents as well as children and adolescents was obtained in Phase 2, wording and response options in the modified PEDSCAL need to be improved. 83 Chapter 5 Discussion. The purpose of this research was to initiate the development of a tool that could be used by children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders, ASDs, specifically autism and Asperger syndrome or mild intellectual disability, MID, to communicate perspectives of their quality of life, QOL. The exploration included, 1. The determination of content validity of a child self-report QOL inventory, pediatric quality of life inventory PEDSCAL, in children and adolescent with ASDs or MID, and 2. The development of a child self-report QOL inventory PEDSCAL to be appropriate for children and adolescents with ASDs. The present study consisted of 2 phases. In Phase 1, the content validity of the PEDSCAL questionnaire was examined using qualitative methods of focus groups and interviews with children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, parents and special school teachers. In Phase 2, the original PEDSCAL questionnaire was redeveloped using the findings from Phase 1 and adapted for use in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. After the amendment of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire, the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire was utilized for children and adolescents with ASDs, and interviews with the children and their parents were conducted. Due to the fact that the majority of the children and adolescents participated in Phase 1 and 2 were primarily diagnosed as ASDs, the data were analyzed mainly in relation to the characteristics of ASDs. Nonetheless, some of the children and adolescents with ASDs also had MID. We predicted that the content validity of a child's self-report of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire among children and adolescents with ASDs or MID would be low due to their impaired cognitive processes and language abilities. We also predicted that there would be a need to reword or redesign the original PEDSCAL questionnaire for use in children and adolescents with ASDs. Content validity of the PEDSQL child self-report in children and adolescents with ASDSOR MID. Through thematic analysis of the data from Phase 1 and 2, 3 themes of concreteness, relationships and perception were identified. The overall findings from Phase 1 and 2 indicated that child self-report used of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire was not appropriate for children and adolescents with ASDs or MID due 84 to a dearth of consideration to their unique nature of social dysfunction, cognitive and language impairments, and deficits in emotional recognition. As regards problems of self-reports in individuals with autism and other mental health conditions, Urachi and McDonald 2006 demonstrated that characteristics of autism including peculiar use of language, specific hindrances to working memory, and perseveration on a subject, may limit the ability of individuals with autism to accurately report and have insight on their sensory experiences. In spite of this limitation, the value of children's own perspectives obtained from self-reports needs to be prioritized in terms of children's rights to express their opinions, which should be respected, protected and fulfilled. Crimeans et al. 2006, UNICEF 2005. In the present study, the aims of thematic analysis of the focus groups and interviews were to identify the perception of QOL measurement in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, and to analyze the interpretation of and attitudes towards the PEDSCAL questionnaires in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. Important aspects of QOL in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. Parents and one adolescent with Asperger syndrome reported that most children and adolescents with ASDs and some with MID experienced difficulty with social interactions and relationships. Through interactions with others, children start to build a theory of mind, which refers to a coherent understanding of mental states of others such as thoughts, beliefs, desires and intentions. White, Hayes, and Livesey 2010a. Individuals with autism, however, have a deficit in theory of mind, which may be interpreted as their particular insensitivity to social stimuli. Ropar and Peebles 2007. In the present study, social interactions of children with ASDs were classified into 4 elements: interactions with friends, family, adults, and community. The majority of parents of children and adolescents with ASDs demonstrated that their children and adolescents had significant difficulties in social interactions with their friends or peers but had more interactive play with their siblings and family, and more communication with adults, particularly their teachers and teacher aides. A few studies reported that children and adolescents with ASDs had at least one friend, and their relationships are often superficial but deep nor reciprocal. Carrington et al. 2003, Church et al. 2000, Travis, 1998. Church et al. 2000 found that middle school-age children with Asperger syndrome established and maintained good relationships with 85 grandparents and other adults such as teachers with whom the children often interact at school. Social difficulties, specifically deficits in social skills and social competence, are characterized as a primary feature of ASDs. Knott et al. 2006, Rao et al. 2008, Stichter et al. 2012. Social skills refer to basic abilities that allow an individual to engage in interactions, such as eye contact. Knott et al. 2006, Stichter et al. 2012. Social competence refers to an individual's ability to effectively and independently engage in social interactions, and make and sustain relationships with others. Knott et al. 2006, Stichter et al. 2012. An individual with social competence is able to effectively adjust oneself to different contexts, using various social skills and behaviors. White et al. 2010c. Social impairments, including restricted interests, deficits in reciprocal communication and developmentally strained peer relationships, lead to limited social interactions among children and adolescents with ASDs. Stichter et al. 2012. These social difficulties for individuals with ASDs originate in infancy, become more with age, and remain across their lifetime. Ozonif et al. 2005, Stichter et al. 2012. Moreover, they may affect other areas of overall functioning, such as academic and emotional development. Rao et al. 2008, Stichter et al. 2012. Therefore, it is critical to identify the content, quality and patterning of social interactions and relationships in children and adolescents with ASDs as parameters of their QOL. Another idiosyncratic feature of relationships in children and adolescents with ASDs was the inclination to be by themselves, which refers to the state of spending time for self without any interactions with others. Abnormalities in the system of self in relation to other in individuals with autism represent separation between understanding of the self and understanding of others. Hobson, 2012, Travis, 1998. Kanner found that children with autism, around the age of 6, appeared to lack comprehension of the meaning of an I in relation to a you. Hobson, 2012. In the present study, some parents and one adolescent reported that the importance and preference of the time and activities for self instead of socializing with others. Church et al. 2000, and Jens Cousins et al. 2006, reported that adolescents with Asperger syndrome were likely to stay in their room alone, watch TV, play on the computer or video games, listen to music, or do reading. Similarly, primary school children with high-functioning autism, 86, preferred to spend a lot of time inside with computers and TV rather than participating in outdoor activities and a variety of sports with others. Church and Copland, 1995. For children and adolescents with ASDs, non-interactive activities may be more enjoyable than interactive play with friends or peers, which is problematic most of the time for them. In the original PEDSCAL questionnaire, however, there are no items regarding non-interactive activities for self. It is reasonable to infer that the significance of an individual's activities in children with ASDs needs to be highlighted as one of the primary domain of their QOL. These unique characteristics of social functioning in children and adolescents with ASDs demonstrate the need for identifying their concepts of social interactions and relationships as well as their favorable activities, which are likely to be non-interactive manner. Despite parents' desires for their children and adolescents to socially interact with others, the children and adolescents themselves may not be keen on or have difficulties with socialization. In fact, it is evident that there were significant disparities between self-reports from children with ASDs and parent proxy reports on social domains of QOL. Camp, Becker et al. 2011, Sheldrick et al. 2011, Shipman et al. 2011. Cognition and perception of the PEDSCAL self-reports in children and adolescents with ASDs are mid-atypical cognitive process and deficits in language in children and adolescents with ASDs are mid-considerably influence their abilities to self-report their QOL. According to Bell 2007, there are 4 important cognitive processes to respond to question. 1. Comprehension of the question including an understanding of the terms and the task in the question. 2. Retrieval of the necessary information from memory. 3. Evaluation of the information. And 4. Communication with the response. The present study reveals that children with ASDs tended to think concretely and have difficulty with interpreting abstract concepts, terms and phrases. Hobson, 2012, reported that concrete thinking in individuals with autism may result from their cognitive impairments of establishing a conceptual and categorical framework of reference which is converted from the instant and unconnected context of experience. The patterning of concrete thinking in individuals with ASDs is more likely to depend on external circumstances rather than inner experiences. Hill et al., 2004. Children with autism, for example, often described 87 their experiences in relation to physical conditions rather than mental or emotional states. Lombardo, Barnes, Wheelwright, and Baron Cohen, 2007. Impaired working memory and executive dysfunction are other notable factors that contribute to cognitive deficits in individuals with ASDs. Urachi and McDonald, 2006, Ozonif et al., 2005, Stichter et al., 2012. Working memory refers to the structures and processes used for temporarily storing and manipulating information, and executive function is defined as the ability to control and coordinate other cognitive processes including planning, working memory, attention, inhibition and cognitive flexibility. Ozonif et al., 2005, Ozonif et al., 1991. Impairment in executive function is related to lack in anticipation of long-term consequences of behavior, and difficulties with self-reflecting and self-monitoring. Ozonif et al., 1991. Dysregulation of executive functioning among children and adolescents with ASDs may affect their abilities to evaluate and report their satisfaction of their QOL. Moreover, children with ASDs had difficulty with interpreting language in flexible manner, in which they cannot understand the meaning of a word with anything other than literal meaning. Church and Copland, 1995, Happy, 1993. It is also reported that children with autism had problems in verbal communication, specifically in the use of pronouns. Hobson et al., 2006. The findings showed that the use and selection of words in the original PEDSCale questionnaire needed to be improved for children and adolescents with ASDs, specifically careful considerations of unique cognitive process, i.e. concrete thinking, and impaired language ability, i.e. literal meaning of a terms. Furthermore, in-depth and simple accounts of each item would be required for children and adolescents with ASDs to comprehend the meaning of each question. Unique characteristics of perception in children and adolescents with ASDs also impacted on the original PEDSCale questionnaire. In the present study, 3 subthemes of visuals, feelings, and behavior were identified under the theme of perception. Among individuals with autism, visual thinking is superior to verbal thinking. Grandin, 2000. Visual thinking is defined as the ability to perceive and think about visual objects and spatial relationships in 2 and 3 dimensions, while verbal thinking refers to the ability to use language to store and categorize memories as associated events. Grandin, 2000. Considering that the unimpaired system of visual 88 thinking and impaired language ability in individuals with ASDs, the use of pictures to depict the description of each question in a questionnaire may be advantageous. Emotion recognition is one of the primary deficits in individuals with ASDs. Stichter et al., 2012, which had considerable effect on the capability of responding to self-reports. Emotion recognition is defined as the ability to identify effective expressions and following emotions in the self and others. Stichter et al., 2012. Although children with ASDs are able to recognize and express simple emotions such as happiness, sadness, and anger, it is hard to interpret and convey feelings relating to their episodes in a coherent manner. Losh and Capps, 2006. The present study found that the children and adolescents with ASDs were able to report their emotions, i.e. fear, sadness, anger and happiness, and their feelings responding to each question in the modified PEDQUEL questionnaire. The nature of their mental states was unstable and fluctuated in a day. Parents described that they were sometimes uncertain about the children's feelings and emotions. These findings highlighted that self-reports would be a privileged method to access to the children's and adolescents' own inner states. However, there were a few problems regarding the use of emotive languages and facial expressions. Parents from phase 1 of the interviews reported that displaying only emotive language such as scared, sad, angry, and happy was difficult for children and adolescents with ASDs to understand the state of each emotion. This issue might be solved by presenting a pictorial facial expression of each emotion together with a script. Use of facial expressions used in response options was sometimes problematic for children and adolescents with ASDs because their own feelings and the facial expressions did not always match each other. For example, in the modified PEDSCale questionnaire, social interactions with other kids were viewed as a positive position. Therefore, if a child has a lot interactions, the response of a lot is shown with smiley face. As it was discussed in the previous section, the children and adolescents with ASDs often become distressed about social interactions. They do not necessarily feel happy like smiley face when they communicate with others. This mismatch between the child's real feeling and the facial expression shown in response scales needs to be resolved in future studies in order not to cause misinterpretation from children and adolescents with ASDs. 89. The present study found that attitudes of the children and adolescents with ASDs towards the modified PED-scale questionnaire were relevant to core symptoms of ASDs. The behavior of individuals with ASDs seems rigid and inflexible. Church and Copland, 1995, Ozoneff et al., 1991, and obsessive and compulsive. Church et al., 2000. Individuals with ASDs often have routine and rituals in precise detail and feel extremely anxious or frustrated over trivial changes. Ozoneff et al., 1991. They also focus on restricted interests or engage in stereotyped and repetitive behaviors. Church et al., 2000, Ozoneff et al., 1991, Stichter et al., 2012. Consistent with these features, parents reported that children and adolescents with ASDs made a routine or pattern to select the same response or place such as smiley face or in the right side regardless of their own feelings. Some children and adolescents preferred positive answers such as a lot or yes, rather than negative such as not at all or no. It was feasible to prevent repetitive behavior in children and adolescents with ASDs by rearranging the order of response scales, which have already trialed in the modified PED-scale questionnaire. Nonetheless, it is not clear from the present findings whether their repetitive behavior and preference influence their responses. Development of the PEDSQL self-reports for children and adolescents with ASDSOR. Mid the aims of content analysis of the focus groups and interviews were to assess the appropriateness of the wording, format and presentation of the PED-scale questionnaire in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, and to identify relevant and irrelevant dimensions of the PED-scale questionnaire to children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. Through content analysis of the focus groups and interviews from Phase 1, we recognized the necessity for the development of the original PED-scale questionnaire. The original PED-scale questionnaire was modified in the wording, format and presentation to meet the needs of children and adolescents with ASDs. In Phase 2, the modified PED-scale questionnaire was piloted on children and adolescents with ASDs and the interviews with the children or adolescents and their parents were analyzed. Mean of time for completion, 10.78 plus or minus 7.18 minutes, of the modified PED-scale questionnaire was longer than the standard of 4 minutes for the original PED-scale, Barney, N.D. However, the result was similar to another study of children with ASDs using the original PED-scale. 90 questionnaire which reported between 7 and 10 minutes. Kulthau et al., 2010. With regard to completion rate, 7 out of 8 participants completed the questionnaire without leaving out any questions. The categories of rewording, responses and presentation were related to impairments in cognitive functioning and language in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. Individuals with ASDs have impaired weak central coherence, which refers to the ability to integrate information from a variety of processes such as perception, attention, linguistic and somatic to draw higher level of meaning. Urachi and McDonald, 2006. In Phase 1, parents reported that multiple information and complex structures which were used in the original PED-scale questionnaire would make children and adolescents with ASDs or MID confused. In particular, it was proposed that sentences be shown in a declarative rather than interrogative manner, fewer response scales be practical, and one question be shown at a time instead of listing many questions in one page. Regarding linguistic issues, it was suggested that words and phrases be used in a literal manner, which means the defined, or normal, meaning of the terms without implication and inference. Bell, 2007, recommended that questionnaires for children should be short in length, consist of short sentences, use straightforward language, present in direct and specific manner, but avoid using complex structure and negative formulations. It is also evident that individuals with ASDs were not able to use language in a flexible manner. Church and Copland, 1995, Happy, 1993. Carrington et al., 2003, found that a child with autism had difficulty in comprehending the words used in the question, and interviewers needed to prompt and reword questions in most interviews. In the present study, the original PED-scale questionnaire was reworded and reformatted, and pictures were inserted in each question. After Phase 2, we recognized that a few phrases would be required to be reworded because expressions of the phrases were not concrete enough for children and adolescents with ASDs. In terms of responses, new ideas were proposed from parents such as varied answers according to the type of questions, and alternative options if the question was not applicable to the child and adolescent. Parents were consistently reported that the type of yes-no question was more straightforward for children and adolescents with ASDs. In general, the format, wording and presentation of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire 91 were less appropriate for children and adolescents with ASDs or mid, and required improvement in order to pilot the questionnaire for the children and adolescents. The modified PEDSCAL questionnaire was more appropriate for children and adolescents with ASDs. However, feedback from parents and children and adolescents in Phase 2 demonstrated that the use of concrete wording and the type of response options may need further amendments to increase the accuracy of responses from the children and adolescents. The domains of social and school functioning were the most discussed contextual issues with regard to irrelevance and omission. Basically, the original and modified PEDSCAL questionnaire had the same interpretation of the questions in both domains of social and school functioning, even though all of the questions in the original PEDSCAL questionnaire were reworded in the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. It was clearly reported that schoolwork between special and mainstream schools were different, and there was no homework in special schools. Due to deficits in social interactions and relationships in children and adolescents with ASDs, the questions about social interactions with peers in the domain of social functioning were not relevant to children and adolescents with ASDs. Instead, questions about interactions with family and teachers or teacher aides seemed to be more relevant and important to their life. Moreover, non-interactive activities in their own time were pertinent aspects for children and adolescents with ASDs but missed in both questionnaires. These findings indicated that the content of the original and modified PEDSCAL questionnaire was not always relevant to QOL in children and adolescents with ASDs or mid. Supplemental QOL domains specific to children and adolescent with ASDs are required. In summary, the content validity of a child's self-report of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire among children and adolescents with ASDs or mid was low. The concept of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire covers most aspects of QOL in children and adolescents with ASDs or mid, including physical, emotional, social and school functioning. However, the content of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire needed to be developed for children and adolescents with ASDs or mid, as their cognition and perception are unique and different from typically developing children and adolescents. 92. The findings indicated that the core ASD's symptoms of impaired social interaction, communication, repetitive behavior, and restrictive interests and activities considerably impact on QOL for this population, and consequently QOL measurement. This indicates that the PEDSCAL questionnaire may assess health status or functional status instead of quality of life due to the similarities between assessment criteria. In this regard, ASD's specific QOL questionnaire may be required to develop, particularly on the domain of social functioning, which focuses on what they like to do, or what they are interested in. In addition, formatting and presentation style of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire was less suitable for children and adolescents with ASDs. The modified PEDSCAL questionnaire, see Appendix I for complete proofs, on the other hand, tailored the structure of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire for children and adolescents in terms of wording, formatting and presentation style. The modified PEDSCAL questionnaire gave parents fascinating insights into their children's internalization as well as QOL. Although most children and adolescents with ASDs completed the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire, presence of parents and parental assistance with the questionnaire would be the main drawback of self-reporting QOL. It is also acknowledged that the PEDSCAL questionnaire will only measure the items that it contains and may not capture other complex social phenomenon that accompanies these children and adolescents as well as families' lives. 93. Chapter 6. Conclusion. This research employed a qualitative descriptive approach to answer the following question: what is an appropriate QOL measurement for children and adolescents with ASDs or mid? From the review of literature, the most commonly used QOL measure in children and adolescents with ASDs, the PEDSCAL Child Self-Report, was selected as the instrument of choice. Summary of findings. The findings showed that the original PEDSCAL questionnaire was not appropriate for children and adolescents with ASDs or mid compared to the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. The main issues regarding the content validity of the original PEDSCAL questionnaire were 1. A number of missing and unrelated questions on the domain of social functioning, 2. Use of abstract concepts and terms, and 3. Monotonous format, response options and presentation style. The core symptoms of ASDs such as impaired social interaction, repetitive behaviors and limited interests are strongly associated with the key factors of social functioning in the PEDSCAL questionnaires. In this regard, the PEDSCAL questionnaires needs to incorporate ASD's specific or child-specific components to assess quality of life in children and adolescents with ASDs instead of their symptoms or functional impairments. Concrete thinking is superior to abstract thinking in children and adolescents with ASDs or MID due to their impairments in cognitive and language ability. Use of simple, concrete and explicit terms and phrases is vital for the PEDSCAL questionnaires. Visuals are also important elements in terms of the children's and adolescents' comprehension of and engagement with the PEDSCAL questionnaires. The format, response options and presentation of the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire, see Appendix I for complete proofs, were improved by use of pictures, facial expressions and one-by-one presentation, which enabled children and adolescents with ASDs to complete the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. The development of the appropriate PEDSCAL self-report for children and adolescents with ASDs or MID may increase the accuracy of their self-appraisal and reflect their own views on QOL. However, pursuing an appropriate questionnaire may result in creating a non-generic but a customized questionnaire for this population. 94 limitations. There were two main limitations: participants and procedure. The researchers attempted to provide a broader picture on the appropriateness of the PEDSCAL questionnaire for children and adolescents with cognitive disability in Phase 1. However, the types of disorder in children and adolescents in Phase 1 were mostly autism spectrum disorders, ASDs, and slightly moderate to mild intellectual disability, MID. Therefore, the researchers decided to focus on children and adolescents with ASDs for participants in Phase 2. All children and adolescents who participated in Phase 2 were primarily diagnosed as ASDs, even though some of them also had intellectual impairments. In addition, most participants had comorbidities such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and global developmental delay. Although different types of intellectual disability were involved, the data from Phase 1 and 2 were analyzed in relation to mainly ASDs and MID. With regard to the research procedure, the facilitator and the interviewer were not the same in each focus group and interview due to the researcher's schedule. However, the procedure of the focus groups and interviews were discussed with the team to ensure the consistency across data analysis. Parental assistance was given to younger children and one adolescent completed the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire by himself. Although the purpose of this research was not collecting self-reports from children and adolescents with ASDs or MID, the findings could have been missed obtaining greater insight into the child's ability to complete the modified PEDSCAL questionnaire. Despite these limitations, the findings provided valuable perception and feedback on the development of the PEDSCAL self-report for children and adolescents with ASDs or MID. Future research. The findings from the present study indicate that further development of the PEDSCAL self-report for children and adolescents with ASDs may be required with respect to rewording, design of response options and ASDs specific social domains. For future studies, it is also worthwhile to investigate different modes of administration such as the use of qualitative interviews and electronic devices. Considered that electronic devices 95 such as the iPad and Dynavox are utilized as educational tools for children and adolescents with ASDs, it may be practical to collect data using these devices. It is noted that there have been media releases that in the American Psychiatric Association's new Diagnostic Manual, DSMV, which will be published in May 2013, the term of Asperger disorder, Asperger syndrome, will be dropped and incorporated under the term of autism spectrum disorder, RAHEL, 2012.